Very good afternoon. Welcome back to the BBC's election centre. We've had around half the results in these local elections so far, taking place in England and in Northern Ireland. And it's got to be said, they make difficult reading for both Conservatives and Labour today, because it's the Lib Dems who've been the main beneficiaries. Look at this.
A Liberal Democrat majority!
Yes, they look quite pleased, don't they? They've gained around 400 councillors so far. It's 398 at the moment. They've won overall control of places like Winchester and Bath and North Norfolk. I should also mention Chelmsford, because that's where the party leader, Sir Vince Cable, went this morning in quite a rush to congratulate his supporters. He said it had been a brilliant result for his party. Conservatives are feeling the pain, really. They're already down more than 640 seats. Still quite a long way to go, by the way. They've gained Walsall, yes, but they've lost more than 20 councillors, including Worcester, Peterborough and St Albans. The Prime Minister, who's in mid-Wales, talking to the Spring Conference and the Welsh Conservatives, said voters had sent the simple message that her party and the Labour Party had to get on with delivering Brexit. What lots hadn't expected was for Labour to be losing seats. They thought that Labour might be gaining at this point. Jeremy Corbyn was in Trafford this morning because they did gain Trafford from the Tories, but it's lost Bolsover and Wirral, and within the past half hour, Darlington, and overall they're down more than 90 seats as I speak. And Rita will be at the screen with all the latest results and analysis. We'll talk to Rita in just a moment, and we'll also be talking to our chief political correspondent, Vicky Young, who's ready with her take on what's going on in the broader political picture, not least, of course, with the Brexit stalemate at Westminster. So stay with us throughout the afternoon on Election 2019. So, 148 councils already declared, 100 to go, so plenty of results to come. And we've had more than 4,000 councillors elected, but we're still waiting for the individual results of more than 4,000 council seats, so plenty to talk about. And what I'd like to do now, given that the counting is still going on in many places, lots were counting overnight, but lots decided to count today, and they include Thanet. Now, this was UKIP's only council until UKIP as a group fell apart in a kind of shambolic way with lots of defections. The party struggled to find candidates this year. The Tories will be hoping to seize majority control in Thanet, which is in Kent. And this is York. Let's have a look at York. Let's have a look at, I think we're in Newcastle there. Let's have a look at York anyway, because it's coming up. There we go, that's it. Currently run by Conservative Lib Dem minority administration. Labour hoping to make gains there, but maybe in York we should keep a sharp eye also on the Lib Dems. So just a few of the counts going on right now. I'm pleased to welcome my latest panel, following a distinguished series of panels overnight. The Lib Dem Home Affairs spokesman, Ed Davey, the Shadow Foreign Secretary for Labour, Emily Thornberry, and the Conservative Party Deputy Chair, Helen Whately. The three of you are warmly welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll be with you in just a second. What I'd like to do at this point is just remind people of what the gains and losses are for the actual council seats, not the councils, but the number of councillors. 652 losses so far for the Tories, 91 losses for Labour, 402 gains for the Lib Dems. It's been a good night for them. There are substantial gains for the Greens, 87 gains so far, and for the Independents, around 300 gains. So you can see where lots of people have been turning overnight, especially those who are disgruntled with the Tories and with Labour. So we'll talk about that with the panel and with Vicky in just a moment. But before that, let's catch up with the day's news. And it's Carrie. Hi, Carrie.
Thanks, Huw. Yes. Hello, here's a summary of the BBC News. Both the Conservatives and Labour have faced a backlash at the local elections, with voters apparently punishing them for the Brexit deadlock. Both parties have suffered significant losses, while the main winners have been smaller parties like the Liberal Democrats and the Greens, as well as independents. The Prime Minister says voters were showing that they want politicians to get on and deliver Brexit. With more on the results and their implications, here's our political correspondent Chris Mason.
Just look at those faces. The Conservatives held Swindon and gained North East Lincolnshire, but they lost control in St Albans, Southend, Broxtowe, Peterborough, Worcester, Basildon and elsewhere.
These were always going to be difficult elections for us, and there were some challenging results for us last night, but it was a bad night for Labour too. And I think people were sending a very clear message, a simple message, to both main parties, to us and the Labour Party: just get on and deliver Brexit.
Thank you.
Not all of her colleagues here at the Welsh Conservative Conference are altogether supportive, though.
Thank you, everybody. And
why don't you resign? The National Convention want you. We don't want you.
Mrs May told to her face she should go. Tradition dictates the day after elections, party leaders head to where they won. Here's Jeremy Corbyn in Trafford in Greater Manchester. But Labour lost control in Hartlepool, the Wirral and Bolsover.
We have won Trafford to an overall majority. We have swings to Labour in a number of boroughs across the whole of councils across the whole of the country, and that gives us a basis on which we can win marginal seats such as Swindon, such as Thurrock and other places, and I'm looking forward to an election that we do that.
It's not exactly been a laugh a minute for the Liberal Democrats in recent years, but they're upbeat today.
Well, I'm just celebrating a really great result here. Chelmsford, Essex, but this story across the country. You know, the Lib Dems were written off at one point, but we're coming back very, very strongly. We're the big winners of the night.
The Lib Dems won control of councils in Bath, Winchester, North Norfolk and the Cotswolds. Independents have done well so far, as has the Green Party.
We've broken through on 16 new councils, really cementing our place as the fourth party in England in local government, and a real momentum, I think, going into the European elections. Of course, we're the biggest representation of any Remain party in the European Parliament at the moment.
It's been tough so far for UKIP. They've gone backwards.
Yes, we've lost some seats, but also we've made some gains in Sunderland. We've made a few gains there, and actually when you look at the results of areas like Sunderland, where we didn't win, we got a lot of second places, so they're good and bad across the board.
There are plenty more results to come, with the parties watching closely, peering into what it might mean for their wider fortunes, and doing so through the giant prism of Brexit. Oh, and here, at daft o'clock in the morning, was this some cross-party collaboration, or perhaps commiseration? Chris Mason, BBC News.
I like the daft o'clock in the morning. Now, counting is underway in Northern Ireland. A total 462 seats are up for grabs across 11 councils. The first few results have started to trickle in, but most results are expected later today or tomorrow morning. Meanwhile, the turnout for these local elections has held at similar levels to those in 2018 and 2016. Early indications show the Brexit impasse hasn't driven voters from going to the polls in significant numbers. Well, that's our summary. For more results coming in and analysis, now back to election 2019. Huw.
Well, yes, indeed, a night and day of some surprises because, you know, as Carrie was mentioning there in the bulletin, lots of people thought that the turnout in these elections would be catastrophically low, as people just simply didn't want to go and vote because they were so disgruntled. But as we've heard, and as John Curtis was telling us a short while ago, and will no doubt tell us again, the turnout is pretty much in line with previous local elections. That tells us something again about people's willingness to engage with the democratic process, even if they are angry and frustrated. They want to turn up and actually, in one or two cases, as we heard earlier today, spoiling the ballot paper and writing messages on them. That's been happening in more numbers than it usually does. But more to the point, people turning up and wanting to vote to register a protest, to register a different kind of choice. And Vicky, that really is one of the important elements of this landscape, isn't it? You know, it's just the fact that, you know, we are talking about local elections which have been heavily coloured by national issues, and that's fed in very strongly into the way that people have behaved.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people were worried about apathy, and they were worried about a very, very low turnout. So I think it's really interesting that people are still coming out to vote. And I think it shows, these results, it's an appetite, it seems, for something different, something other than the two main parties. And that's why you see, you know, the clear winners of today so far and will continue to be are the Liberal Democrats. Now, of course, they're coming from an incredibly low base. They've had a torrid time since the coalition, you know, wiped out in the southwest in the general election, councillors losing their seats for years. So, you know, they had to be showing some progress, but I think the progress they're showing will be much more than maybe they were expecting. And I think if you're a Conservative MP in the southwest, you're going to be looking at these results and feeling slightly concerned. Now, the Tories, no getting away from it, a devastating night for them. Now, they will argue, of course, that they've been in power for 9 years. It's pretty normal for a government to be punished at the polls when it comes to local elections. You know, but there is no doubt there's anger from their own grassroots about what's been going on at Westminster. And it is always hard to translate how people are voting in local elections and say it's about national issues. But Brexit has dominated so much in the recent years. And we've heard from councillors who've lost in Tory seats where councils have been lost, and they are blaming their political masters at Westminster for not delivering on something. And then I think, in some ways, more interesting is the Labour story. This is a party that wants a general election and wants to be in power, wants to govern. And yet they are losing seats. They are losing seats and losing councils. And I don't think many Labour MPs were expecting that. And that's going to be a real cause for concern, that Brexit doesn't seem to just be harming the Conservatives. It does seem that the slightly ambiguous policy that Labour have had on Brexit is now proving to be a bit of a problem, where it's not doing well for anyone. Both sides are punishing them, and it's much harder to explain for an opposition party that's been up against, let's face it, a pretty chaotic Tory government. I mean,
I think that narrative is one that we need to explain quite carefully, because the Conservatives could end up in a position where they have one of their worst performances in local government elections for 20 years. You have to go back to John Major's time when they lost 2,000 councillors in one session, which was obviously a meltdown. We're not in that place, but they could end up in a pretty bad place. And yet we're saying, what are you saying, that you're pricing that into the fact that there's been a chaotic turbulence around Brexit? You're pricing that kind of loss in, but that the Labour loss, even though it's much smaller, is more telling? Is that what we're saying?
Because you've got to look about where they're coming from. It's not just about the numbers of where we are now, it's where they're coming from 4 years ago, if you want to compare this set of elections with the ones that happened 4 years ago. So, Labour are not making progress. And if you're a party that wants to win the next general election, you need to be making progress. The Conservatives had a very good run 4 years ago, and so they would expect to lose. Now, I'm not in any way downplaying the devastating loss that the Tories are going to have here. They are going to be extremely upset about this, particularly the councillors and the councils they have lost, because they know that it is a judgment on their record in power. But I think if you're a Labour councillor, a Labour activist, you're going to be really concerned about this. I think people sometimes underestimate how far Labour have to come at a general election to get power, because they did do well in getting almost 42% of the share of the vote at the last general election. But Labour have to win 60 seats. They have to win 60 seats from somewhere at a general election to get close to power. Now, looking at these figures, it's hard to see where they would come from.
What I'd like to do is put some of those points to my guests here. But before we do that, let's just remind viewers of some of the latest results we've had, because we're now, it's 2:15 on Friday afternoon. The counts in many areas started, last night at after 10 o'clock. So results still coming in, results being declared, as we speak, and we're just following some of those. So Rita, why don't you bring us up to date with the latest ones?
Huw, the results here on the screen illustrate the sort of churn there's been during this election in terms of control of councils. And just to remind viewers how to read these screens, pretty self-evident on the whole, Amber Valley is Labour, but you can see the little blue flash there at the end. That means that it was Conservative, so this is a Labour gain from the Conservatives. Burnley, which is in grey, that means that's now a hung council. It was a Labour council and that's now become a hung council. I want to compare a couple of the big councils in the north of England, Calderdale and Darlington, because these two have been straightforward Labour Conservative fights, but with two very different results. So in Calderdale, Labour, you can see, has gained that council from no overall control, a big metropolitan borough council there. They'll be very pleased with that. In Darlington, I'll just go into it. There's a different story. So the Conservatives, in fact, have pushed ahead with 22 seats compared to Labour's 20. And if I just show you the way in which the seats have changed. This is the change since the last election in 2015. Conservatives have put on 5, Labour have lost 9. So a very interesting result there in Darlington. If I go back to the main screen, one of the other themes of the election has been the increase in the Green vote, in the Greens' number of councillors and share of the vote. And this is very interesting in Mid-Suffolk. Look at that. The Greens gaining 12 councillors in Mid-Suffolk, meaning that the Conservatives have lost this council. They were just short by 2. And one more result I want to go into. South Oxfordshire. This was Conservative, as you can see. That has now become a hung council, and this is part of the familiar story that we've got now of this election, of the Liberal Democrats winning 12 seats here, and the seat change will just show you what's happened. Conservatives losing 23 seats on this council, the Liberal Democrats gaining 11, and the Greens gaining 5. And Layla Moran, the Lib Dem MP who was on the programme a little earlier, said that in this council there was an agreement between the Liberal Democrats and the Greens to not contest certain wards, so they wouldn't compete with each other in certain wards, and that's what it's produced.
Rita, thank you very much. And as Rita was taking us through some of those latest results, just in the last few seconds, another result in. Vicky, do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, this is another loss for the Conservatives and a gain for the Liberal Democrats, Mole Valley. So another Lib Dem council going to them.
Ed, what do you make of that?
Well, that's Heartland Conservative territory, Leatherhead and Dorking, and it's gone very strongly to the Liberal Democrats, and I think that's the story of the night. My concern is the way the Prime Minister is interpreting this. She is saying that it means that Labour and the Conservatives have to together deliver Brexit. I don't think that's what the people of Britain are saying. I think they're saying stop Brexit. Liberal Democrats won last night very clearly, no one's disputing that, and we stood on a ticket of stop Brexit very, very clearly. No one can say we've hidden that. We've been clear from the start for a long, long time. And so I think the Prime Minister should think again, should drop Brexit, and actually should listen to the British people. I think the British people are saying they've had enough of this. It's gone on too long. We've wasted too much money. It's far too complicated. It's not what they thought was going to happen. And I think the case for a people's vote, the case for giving the people the final say, is strengthened by the Liberal Democrats' gains last night.
Surely, Ed, there will be a raft of reasons why people voted.
Of course.
Lib Dem.
No, of course. I mean, I'll give you one. Travelling around the country as I did, and I went to about 15, 16 councils, the Conservatives' cuts to the police was a big issue. People were worried about antisocial behaviour, about crime. That was a big issue. There were those public services issues which you would expect. But there was one big issue, one on the doorsteps, let's be clear. A lot of Conservative voters who've voted Conservative all their lives were coming to the Liberal Democrats because they either are Remainers or they think the Conservatives are just completely a shower, probably the most incompetent government we've ever seen. And we've seen some Labour, lifelong Labour supporters coming to us because they're shocked that Labour is now a Brexit party. So that's why I'm confident in saying I think the British people are saying stop Brexit, not, as the Prime Minister is trying to suggest, get on with Brexit.
I mean, I would say, wouldn't I, that if that were the case, you'd be doing, you could claim that if you were doing even better than you're doing, because it's all relative.
Huw, these are the best local election results in our history.
But how do you translate it? In a general election, the issue has always been for the party, hasn't it? Yes, you have a broad base at council level, you start to run councils, you start to win some seats, but how do you translate that into a general election? It's not guaranteed that that would happen.
It's not guaranteed at all, but I think we could win a huge number of seats across the country. I mean, take Sheffield Hallam, for example, Nick Clegg's old seat, which we lost the Labour Party 2 years ago. We beat Labour 2-1 in Sheffield Hallam constituency. And I could take you through a lot of constituencies we used to hold and some one we've never held. So take St Albans. We won St Albans last night off the Tories on the popular vote, absolutely smashed them. So the sets of results last night, if you want to extrapolate from the general election, I know you have to be careful about that, but we would be back in big numbers in Westminster on the back of this. And I think that is responding to what Vince Cable and indeed Tim Farron before him have been consistently saying since the referendum. We're against Brexit, and we've led that campaign. We've led the campaign for the people's vote, and I think the people have spoken last night. Stop Brexit.
We will certainly ask Professor John Curtis for a Westminster readout. We'll do that in a few minutes, and then we'll see where we are on that. We'll join John in just a few minutes' time. Emily, what do you make of that, the assertion that this Lib Dem performance is a very clear message? It's to stop Brexit, says Ed.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's quite like that. I think that we're comparing this result with one that took place on the night of a general election. So the two main parties did well, and frankly, there was an absolute bloodbath for the Lib Dems. And so one would expect there to be some life breathed back into the Lib Dems in this election, and obviously that's what we've seen. We've seen the Tories doing very badly, and we've seen a mixed picture for Labour. I would like us to have done better. There are, I think about some of the people that I know in some of the local authorities like Darlington. It's really sad that we've lost control over Darlington. But on the other hand, as you've just said, we've won Amber Valley, we've won Calderdale. So it is a mixed picture, I think. I think the lesson to take away from this is this. I think people are fed up with the impasse on Brexit. I think that I've heard messages from people on both sides. I've heard people saying, just get on with it. Just leave. Even if it's with no deal, just get on with it. And I've heard other people say, I'm just fed up with it. Could we just stay? And so I think the problem, the challenge, and I think the other message is, and also we're fed up with just hearing about Brexit, and there are so many other things that we need to be talking about. And so I think what I take from that is we need to have movement on Brexit, and I'm happy to talk about that in some detail later. And I think the other thing is that if you look at the last general election, when we were able to talk about core issues for Labour, we did very well. And I think that if we can move on from Brexit and go back to talking about austerity, talking about public services, I'm happy to take on the Lib Dems on issues like that. I'm happy to take on the Greens and the Tories, because I think those core messages and how we can change people's lives are actually very popular with the public. So that's what I take from it.
Helen, your take?
Well, also that I'd like to move on and start talking about other things and the other areas that we're working on. Certainly, so yes, it was an election which has been held through the lens of Brexit, and it's inevitable that we're looking at the results in that way. I don't have the same readout as Ed has had, that it's a message that people are saying, no, we want to stay. I mean, I think the message continues to be that the country is very, very divided on Brexit. What I heard significantly often on the doorstep was this huge frustration with Brexit and with not making progress. Well, just Parliament overall not making progress. Right. Parliament, I mean, yes, government expect to tend to get the blame for that, but it was often, all you politicians very much the feeling, but also a really strong message coming through from particularly people who voted Leave of I feel like I haven't been listened to. Why haven't we left yet? And that was the strongest thing that came through. People saying that they were just so frustrated and why haven't we left yet, and wanting us to do what they voted for in 2016.
And what's your answer to why we haven't left yet? What do you say to people when they say that to you?
Well, I say, as an MP who has voted for the withdrawal agreement, I'm frustrated too that we haven't left yet. I originally voted to remain, but I said this is a referendum result. Ever since then, we should deliver on it. So I'm feeling frustrated that we're stuck in it too, because I came into politics to do other things, not to talk about our relationship with the EU. So I share some of that frustration. But I do sort of try and talk about then the parliamentary arithmetic, where we're just stuck, where Parliament is divided like the country is divided.
But do you explain to voters that it's because of quite a few of your colleagues who've refused to back their own Prime Minister on this, that's the reason that the 29th of March passed without any exit taking place?
Well,
Do you spell that out to them?
I recognise that's part of the picture. Of course, we're in a minority government as well, so we don't have a majority. Even as just us alone as the Conservatives couldn't have a majority.
You're meant to have the DUP on side, aren't you?
So
You're not meant to be a minority.
So I think, yes, I acknowledge that's part of the challenge for us. But also, both of our parties had in our manifestos in the last general election that we were going to see through the referendum result. So I think we share some of the responsibility.
Whoa.
Can I just ask about this?
I want to book an objection to that, big time.
Can I just say, I don't think there's any ambiguity in the way that Emily and Helen have said about these results. Yeah. The pro-Brexit parties, the Conservatives and Labour and UKIP, made significant net losses. The pro-Remain parties, led by the Liberal Democrats, but also the Greens, have made significant gains. What's ambiguous about that? I think it's a clear message. Now, I do agree with them. There's an impasse in Parliament because the Conservatives are so divided. And there are people out there amongst the voters who are saying, let's get on with it. I agree with you, Emily. But I don't think that's the overall message. And I think it makes the case for what Liberal Democrats have been arguing for, a people's vote. If we can't get it through in Parliament because the Tories are so divided and that Labour won't help them, I'm not sure if you're helping them. It sort of depends on who you talk to. But if we can't get it through in Parliament, then we have to go back to the people.
Let's bring in another contributor, because Mark Francois has been waiting patiently to talk to us, the Conservative MP at Westminster. Mark, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Right. What is your reading of your party's performance in these local elections?
Well, firstly, I'm very sorry that it would seem, because of frustrations with our failure to deliver Brexit, some 700 hard-working Conservative councillors may have lost their seats, and I deeply regret that that has happened. It wasn't their fault, but people have taken it out on them in a sense. But this, I'm afraid, is just the beginning. I'm not a scientist, Hugh, but I understand before a tsunami, the sea goes out for a minute or so, and then it comes crashing back in. This is the sea going out. The 23rd of May will be an absolute tsunami.
So, just to spell it out, you mean the European elections, yes?
Yes, sorry, yes, the European elections. I should have been clear, yes.
Just in case
the European
people
elections
aren't clear,
on the 23rd of May.
Why do you say that?
Because there's clearly widespread frustration across the British electorate that we haven't left the European Union, despite the Prime Minister promising 108 times that we would leave by the 29th of March. But I think people have still discriminated to some extent, so they've partly taken it out on us last night, but they're really, by and large, saving it up for the 23rd of May. I personally think that this whole thing has morphed. What do I mean by that? I think it's changed from just leave versus remain. It's now the people who want to leave or voted to leave, and the establishment, including senior members of the civil service and a lot of MPs in the House of Commons, who've never accepted the result of the referendum and who have done everything they can for 2.5 years to stop it. And I will absolutely vote Conservative on the 23rd of May, always have, always will do, but I fear a lot of people won't. And on the 23rd of May, the people get their own back on the establishment, and it will be a tsunami.
Lots of people watching, Mark, will think, hang on a second, this is a guy who's persistently refused to back his own Prime Minister and the deal that she's tried to put together over 2 years. You are part of the reason that Brexit hasn't happened.
Well, and so are the Labour Party. They voted against.
No, but you are.
So, well, with respect, when it came before the House of Commons, the Labour Party voted against it, the SNP voted against it, the DUP voted against it, the Liberals voted against it. What is now, in effect, Change UK, then TIG, voted against it, and so did a number of Tory MPs. That's why it never went through. It was overwhelmingly rejected by the House of Commons. The first time round, it was the biggest defeat in the entire history of Parliament for any government on anything ever at all. So it wasn't just some Tory MPs, it was the overwhelming weight of the House of Commons, because MPs have read the so-called withdrawal agreement. They know that it means we don't actually leave. We remain half in and half out, so we betray the referendum decision. And that's why overwhelmingly MPs from all parties in the House of Commons have decisively rejected it 3 times.
But we're talking here about, in this context, about your party's performance. And, you know, time and again overnight, we've had Conservative colleagues of yours saying that voters are angry, frustrated and fed up at the failure to deliver Brexit. And I'm just putting it to you politely, you are part of that.
Well, no, because there was a YouGov poll a few weeks ago, and when they asked the public, do you think the Prime Minister's deal represents leaving the European Union, 14%, 1-4 said yes, 54% said no. The public, because I and others in other parties have done our best for 2 years to explain what's in the agreement, the public now know it means we don't leave the European Union. And I did a lot of door knocking with my councillors. I'm sure Helen did the same, and MPs from all parties. We go out and support our councillors in the local elections. We all do that. But in a month or so of door knocking, in fact slightly longer, not one constituent, not one on a doorstep said to me, what we really need, Mark, is a customs union. Not a single constituent, but time and again constituents said to me, just get out. The withdrawal agreement doesn't take us out, it keeps us in. That's why a third of the cabinet and the senior civil servants who drafted the blooming thing are always so in favour of it, because they know it keeps us in the European Union. The problem for the British establishment is that the public have twigged them and seen through it, and the tidal wave is coming whether they like it or not. And will a change of leadership change any of that then? Well, my position on this is not a secret here. I've called for the Prime Minister to go a while ago. The Prime Minister voted Remain. She's surrounded in number 10 Downing Street by senior civil servants and others who have never accepted the result of the referendum and have done everything they can for 2.5 years to frustrate it. So I've come to the reluctant conclusion we will never leave the European Union while Theresa May is Prime Minister. The only way we will leave is if my party elects a Brexiteer, someone who actually voted to leave and who's got their heart in it and actually will help to take us out of the EU. We will never leave the EU with a Prime Minister that voted Remain.
Who's your money on?
I actually haven't chosen who I'm going to vote for here. I'm not being coy with you. I genuinely haven't decided who to vote for, but I do believe it will have to be a Brexiteer, and the Tory party's sort of fanzine website, a thing called Con Home, has run. They have a panel of Tory party members that they poll regularly. In polling terms, it sort of stands up as a proper scientific sample. And when they've polled that panel over the last couple of months or so, overwhelmingly Tory party members want a leader who is a Brexiteer. So I'm afraid that's bad news for anyone in the cabinet who fancies their chances and voted Remain. They will never be Prime Minister.
Mark, bear with us. Helen, what do you make of that?
So, I mean, to me, this is, I guess, the frustration is that what I heard from voters is that they want to move on and they want us to leave the European Union. Didn't talk on the doorstep about the details of the withdrawal agreement. It's just an overall, can you deliver the referendum result and get on and leave? Now, my reading of the withdrawal agreement is it is getting on and leaving and taking us out of the European Union and the single market and all the things that are composed of that. But clearly it recognises the other side of the argument, which is the importance of having an ongoing close relationship with the European Union, recognises that we're a divided country on that, and that we need to come to a compromise agreement that can bring everyone together again after all this period of great division. Also, when we talk about polling, so my reading of some recent YouGov polling was that for people who voted Remain, if it was a choice between no deal and the Prime Minister's deal, they would much rather have the Prime Minister's deal. For people who voted Leave, it was a choice between remaining in the Prime Minister's deal. They would much rather have the deal. So if people recognise that there is going to have to be a compromise, in general, they would much rather have the deal. So that's where it might not be anybody's first choice, because on the extremes you tend to go one way or the other.
With respect,
actually, in terms of coming together, it's a way forward. That's what I hear.
With respect, we had an opinion poll last night. We've lost 700 hard-working councillors, and the results are still coming in. That number's going up, not down. At what point are my colleagues going to wake up and smell the coffee?
Are you not smelling the coffee, Helen?
Well, I mean, like Mark said, I'm also really upset that councillors in my constituency have lost their wards, and I know that they're hard-working people and I've campaigned with them, and I'm really unhappy that they've been caught up in all of this national division. But still, what I heard overall is people want us to get on, to not be stuck in this impasse. It's just a different read of it from Mark.
Huw, the problem is the Conservative vision. You've seen it there. Mark and Helen not being able to agree. You saw the Prime Minister at a Welsh Conservative conference being heckled by Conservative activists. I've never seen that before. And so people talk about national division. I think the biggest division is in the Conservative Party. And that's why they've been rejected, because they're failing on Brexit and because people want to change. And I think people want to stop Brexit. And if that division continues, it is hurting our country. It's hurting our economy. We can't deal with the NHS. This Conservative Party, if it can't get itself together, it should just go.
It's an eternal truth, Mark, isn't it? And you'll know it better than anyone as an experienced politician. Divided parties do not appeal to the electorate.
Well, I'm not denying that, Hugh, and I'm not attempting to pretend on your programme this afternoon that the Conservative Party at the moment, is a hotbed of love and harmony. Clearly, the viewers know that, and we saw that partly reflected last night. But on the 23rd of May, in the European elections, people won't just be voting on a mixture of local and European issues, which I think is what happened last night. They'll be voting very clearly on the European issue, and I think in that election they will in effect pass a verdict on the Prime Minister's failure to take us out of the European Union. And where I think many MPs go wrong, we're in the Westminster Village, the babble in the bubble, as somebody once called it, and I think a lot of MPs have forgotten who the boss is. The boss is the British people. We report to them, they don't report to us. They voted in a referendum to leave, however much it might upset Ed Davey, who I've always got on well with. We had a referendum, they voted to leave. The reason they're so angry is that we haven't kept our word. If you remember, we sent a booklet to every household in Britain, in the UK, before the vote, and famously said, this is your decision. The government will implement what you decide. They haven't implemented it. That's why people are so angry. And if you think they're angry now, wait for the 23rd of May.
Just one question from Vicky before I let you go, Mark. Thanks.
Yeah. Mark, I'm just wondering how you explain that actually in lots of parts of the country, Conservative councillors are losing to Liberal Democrats and Greens, who are obviously very much pro-Remain. So you're interpreting this as a failure to deliver on Brexit, when actually it's the Liberal Democrats who are scooping up a lot of your votes.
Well, I think a lot of Conservative voters sat on their hands. We obviously need to go through all of the detail, and the psephologists will do that. But where we have unfortunately lost councillors, which I very much regret, I think you find in a lot of cases that's because a lot of traditional Conservative supporters abstained because they were unhappy. But on the 23rd of May, there is nowhere to hide for anybody. That is a vote absolutely specifically on the European issue. And the public, I think, will pass their verdict on the establishment in all parties, and the establishment aren't going to like it, because you can only fool the people for so long. The people have woken up to the fact that the British establishment are determined not to let them leave the European Union, and on the 23rd of May they will take their revenge.
Mark, good of you to join us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Mark Francois there for us. Well, lots of focus there on the 23rd of May, the European elections, which are meant to take place on that day, of course, although lots of politicians want to avoid it, but we're heading that way. And of course, there'll be far more parties taking part than there were yesterday, with these elections were just in England and in Northern Ireland. And of course, we include then the Scottish National Party. And let's go to Dundee, because Stephen Gethings has been waiting patiently to talk to us. Stephen, thanks very much for talking to us today. Your perspective then, as you look ahead to the end of May, what would you tell viewers?
Well, what seems to be clear, and to be fair, this is something that's been touched on, is having that clear position on where we are with Brexit. I think the Conservatives are being seen as making an absolute mess of it. The Labour Party aren't giving out a clear position. This is the biggest crisis to be facing the United Kingdom since the war, and it's no great surprise that both of those two biggest parties at UK level are being punished. I don't think this is about being in government. The SNP's been in government for 12 years. And although, you know, there's always stuff you can do better, we've a clear line on Brexit. And actually, we won a by-election in the city behind me in Dundee last night.
When you look at strategy for the European elections, what's your strategy going to be?
It's very clear. Scotland voted to remain in the European Union, and we should remain. We know that there is no better deal than the one that we have at the moment. But one thing that's really clear is that we need to work together across the party divides. I mean, we've seen the Greens do well and the Liberals do well. Our colleagues with whom we're working very, very closely at Westminster, along with Plaid Cymru, and even some members of the Labour Party and Conservative Party who get it, that this is damaging. It's doing untold damage to our economy, to our fabric, and frankly needs to end. And we need a second referendum, and we need no more prevarication from the Labour Party and the Conservative Party.
Stephen, good of you to join us, and sorry to have kept you waiting. Stephen Gethin's there for us for the SNP in Dundee. Emily, you were going to make a point. What was it?
Yeah, so at the top of the programme, I said that I thought that there were two things I thought that we should take away as learning. So the first being that people are fed up with the way in which Parliament has not, and the government have not been able to deliver on Brexit, and the second being that there are other pressing issues and they want to hear us talk about those as well. So, and I said that I would go back to what I thought in relation to what we should do on Brexit and how we have, I agree, got into an impasse. I think the first thing one has to say is that we had a referendum, the country was divided, the Labour Party's view was that we should be Democrats above all else, and that statespeople in those circumstances should try and keep the country together. We have had a government that, frankly, I think have stumbled around for years now and have not been able to deliver something in a way that a government should be able to. And we have been trying to keep them honest. And it has got very difficult. And I think that we have ended up in such an impasse that whereby, I mean, we're in negotiations with the government. We have always made it clear what it is that we want. We are the party that tries to look after working people, and we feel that looking after the economy and jobs is our biggest priority. And so we have priorities in terms of that. And like at 12:10, after we're supposed to have left, then we get invited in to see Theresa May. And we've been clear about what it is that we want, and we've been trying to negotiate. Now, as other Conservatives and other people have noticed, Theresa May is not very good at compromising. But if she was to wake up tomorrow morning and not be Theresa May and be somebody else instead, and suddenly say, do you know what, I'm going to accept Labour's deal because I know that it works, the European Union said it worked, experts in Britain have said it will work, so that's going to be our policy now. Our problem is going to be that she's not going to be the one who's going to be delivering it. It'll be another Tory leader, and it looks like it's going to be a hard Brexiteer or a no-dealer. And our problem is that we need some guarantees that even if they agree with what it is that we want to achieve, whether we're really going to get it. And I think the other problem is that no matter what deal is finally come to in Parliament, when the music stops, it will be really controversial. And our problem will be, essentially, are we delivering what the British public voted for? I think this is the question. And I think in the end, my prediction is that we are going to need to go back to the people and we're going to need to say to them, did you vote for this? Because it seems to us to be probably quite a long way from what you thought you were going to get, because there were all sorts of promises made. And now this is the only viable deal that this Tory government can come up with, that can go through Parliament and through the European Union. But there's a lot of compromise in this. Probably a lot of people are not happy. Just tell us, do you want us to leave like this or shall we remain? And frankly, if you want us to leave like this, we'll get on with it. But if, now that we look at reality, and it's so far away from £350 million on a bus and all the other things that, were being promised, all the unicorns and rainbows and everything else, we look at the reality of what the deal will look like. If it's a long way from what you wanted, just confirm for us this is what you want. Okay. And that, I think, is, in the end, the only way we're going to break the impasse.
Do we agree with
That's
that,
hugely good news, Emily, because I know you have supported the idea of a confirmatory people having the final say.
Listen, it's taken me a while to get persuaded.
Yeah,
because I was trying to begin with
to
deliver on.
I'm welcoming your conversion, so I'm being friendly.
No, I'm just telling you the truth.
All I'm saying is the Labour's European election manifesto isn't committing the Labour Party to what you've just said.
Yes, it is. Absolutely, it is. What it says is that we will not support a bad deal from the Tories or no deal, and that we will fight that, and that if necessary, we will need to go back to the people for a confirmatory. Yes.
Yes.
But if necessary, we're going to get a bad deal or a Tory deal.
So I thought you were saying you supported a referendum in all circumstances. Now you're saying the Labour Party manifesto says it may do.
No.
There's a big difference.
No. The European manifesto, for the first time, commits the Labour Party to there being a confirmatory vote if necessary. Wait a minute.
It's an option.
Listen, we might end up.
Important words.
No, but listen to what I'm saying. you know, if Theresa May decides that she's going to deliver Labour's Brexit, and somehow or other we get the cast iron guarantees that, frankly, we're going to need, given Boris or whoever else is going to end up being in charge of the Tory party, if we get that, then, you know, but let's say we don't, which I think is kind of quite likely, then we would need to go back to the public, because we will end up with a bad deal from the Tories or no deal, and we need to have that confirmed by the public. And our manifesto commits us to that, and that is in line with what I've been saying today.
So would you like to know, the three of you, now that we've had a bit of an exchange there, would you like to know what the projected national share of the vote is? Because this is quite an interesting moment for us. The projected national share of the vote that the BBC's produced, and John Curtis and his experts have produced, this is a national share which assumes that there was an election across Britain yesterday, not just in England and in Northern Ireland, but across Britain. So it shows 28% apiece to the Tories and Labour, and the Lib Dems on 19%, and the others on 25%. Let's keep those figures up there, because I want to bring John in to explain, A, how we got this figure, John, and what it means.
Well, let's take a go at the first question, Huw. What we've been doing is collecting the detailed ward-by-ward results in 40 local authority areas. We've been comparing the result, particularly with what happened in 2015, which, of course, the vote took place on the same day as the general election, but also with what happened in 2016 and 2018. And on the basis of that, estimating the extent to which parties' votes have changed. And from that, we can calculate what we think the outcome of a general election would have been, assuming that voters behaved in the way that voters who participated in the local election actually did. And this is something now that we've been doing for almost 40 years. So that does therefore mean we can give you some idea as to how these figures compare with many a previous local election. Headline number one, this is only the second time that both the Conservatives and Labour have been below 30%. The one other previous occasion was in 2013, when, if you remember, this was the local elections when all of a sudden we discovered that UKIP had become a serious force in British politics, and did remarkably well in that year's county council elections, and in so doing pushed both Conservative and Labour below 30%. So you can now understand why we've been talking, frankly, repeatedly in recent hours, that this is a rejection of both the two largest parties, because now we're in a situation where their combined share of the vote stands as a pale imitation of the 82% that they had just 2 years ago in the general election. Headline number two. Now, I know Ed Davey has been desperate to convince us that this is the best Liberal Democrat performance ever. But of course, what he's trying to do is to suggest to us that we can learn something about the level of Liberal Democrat force by looking at the change between two time points, i.e. between 2015 and 2019. Well, if one of those time points, which happens in this case to be 2015, was a rather bad year for you, then it isn't necessarily the case that even though you've made a non-trivial recovery, that you've necessarily put in your best ever performance. Now, good news for Ed Davey. This does look to us like the best Liberal Democrat local election performance since his party went into coalition with the Conservatives in 2010, but it is still well short of the kind of performance that the party routinely registered from the early 1990s all the way to 2010, when we were actually never put them below 24%. So partial recovery. I'm sure they might want to open the bottle of Prosecco, but I still think that the best champagne still needs to remain on ice.
Well, Ed is alleging that there's some good Prosecco around. I'm going to let viewers form their own judgment on that. But a quick response, Ed, to what John was saying there about your possible, let's say, over-generous reading of the figure.
Well, I was reading it in terms of council seats gained and councils controlled. That was my interpretation. I hadn't seen those figures. And on the figures I was presenting, I think the case stands. I still think to get 19% now, given our national share in the opinion polls, is a dramatic improvement on what people thought about as just a few days ago. And I don't disagree with someone as eminent as John Curtis, of course, compared to some of the years in the past when we've done even better. But this is a remarkable turnaround for the party, and I think it puts us in hugely good stead. And let's remember, Liberal Democrat performances at general elections are based on really good local election results. I mean, I wouldn't have won my seat in 1997 if we hadn't taken control of Kingston Council in 1994. And you can say that about a lot of Liberal Democrat MPs. So the fact that we've won these councillors, we've won these councils, and we've seen a pretty good share of the vote, that sets us in really good stead for the future. Plus, our positions on the key issue of the day. We're not a Brexit party like Labour and the Tories. We're an anti-Brexit, we want to stop Brexit. And on things like climate change, where we're leading the debate, on a whole areas of, like, for example, on crime, where we've been arguing for more police. Those bread and butter issues that I think will determine the elections in the future to come. I think we've got very strong positions.
John, can you say something about Labour's performance, and then I'll bring Emily in to respond to that?
Well, I mean, the honest truth is, of course, is that this has to be regarded as disappointing for Labour. I think, what we have got out of tonight's or yesterday's results is an indication that the Brexit impasse has indeed ended up with Labour falling away as badly as the Conservatives. Viewers may not remember that actually last year we had Labour and the Conservatives neck and neck, but then it was 35 apiece rather than the 28 apiece. So basically we are saying that Labour have fallen back in the last 12 months during the period where the Brexit impasse has evolved and continued just as much as the Conservatives. And to that extent, at least, I think the Labour Party has to ask itself whether or not its response to the Brexit deal and the Brexit impasse has been adequate or not. And certainly there is plenty of opinion polling evidence out there. There's that whatever people think about how well or badly Theresa May has handled Brexit, and the truth is they don't think very much of it, they don't think that Jeremy Corbyn would necessarily have done a better job. And you can therefore imagine why, when voters are indeed rather frustrated, albeit I entirely accept some are frustrated because we haven't left and others are frustrated because we haven't had another second referendum. But that when voters are frustrated, if they don't have confidence in the ability of the opposition to deliver on the policy on which the government is seen to be failing, then actually they turn to other parties in order to express that frustration, including, of course, something we're not able to reflect in these figures. I think, most remarkably at all, being quite ready in a way that we have frankly not seen in English local government elections for a very long time, to vote for none of the above, i.e. for independent non-party candidates.
Thoughts on that, Emily?
I couldn't really hear what he was saying.
Oh.
You've got an earpiece and we don't, so we're having a bit of difficulty. But if you could perhaps... Sorry, Huw. I know you've only had an hour's sleep, but I couldn't really hear
I thought he was
saying.
commendably clear, actually.
Was he good? I'm sure
John,
he was, but he
do you want to summarise your Labour thought in a slightly louder voice?
Yes, I'll happily. Basically, I was suggesting that what these figures show is that Labour's vote has fallen over the last 12 months by exactly the same amount as the Conservative vote, because 12 months ago we had the two parties on 35%, you're now both on 28%, and this raises questions that although indeed voters may be unhappy about Brexit, and above all the government's handling of Brexit, the opposition have not exactly persuaded the electorate that they would be able to do a better job. Ergo, the apparent willingness of voters to go elsewhere, including, perhaps most interestingly, for what I'm suggesting is a bit of an element of none of the above, i.e. for independent, non-party candidates. And to that extent, at least, the opposition is in no way at all demonstrating an ability to profit from the government's political misfortune.
Every word there, John. Thank you very much. Emily, your response.
Yeah. I mean, I understand what you're saying, and that's why I think that we do need to move on. Well, really, the reason we need to move on is because it's in the interest of the country. But the Labour Party also, we need to keep pushing. I mean, the difficulty has always been is that we have to respond to what the government does. It's very difficult for us to take the initiative. That's the essence of the way our political system works. The executive takes the initiative and we have to respond. And we have been trying to keep them honest by saying we will agree if you will do this, but it's very hard from the sidelines of being the opposition, which is a miserable place to be, to try to keep sort of pushing the government in the right direction. So I fully understand why people may feel that, you know, we aren't leading the Brexit in the right way, but we're not in a position to be able to lead.
But what if you would something else? But something other than Brexit. I mean, there's the issue of leadership. There's the issue of anti-Semitism. Just Tony Robinson, the actor, has just left the Labour Party, citing those things as the reason that he is doing so. It might not be that it is just about Brexit for your party.
I think that we need to get the issue of Brexit clear. I think that we need to continue to move it. I think that we have been doing the right thing in terms of being, frankly, the only party that has approached it in a proper statesperson-like way of trying to keep the country together and represent both Leavers and Remainers in a democratic way. And we have been trying in the circumstances to get the country going in the right direction, which is essentially measuring everything that we do against what will be good for the economy.
But some of your MPs are saying that Jeremy Corbyn's leadership was coming up on the doorstep and the issue of anti-Semitism.
I have to say that, I mean, I've been a member of the Labour Party for a very long time now, and whenever I've been on the doorstep, particularly when we've been in opposition, the name of the leader has come up on the doorstep and people have said, unless you get rid of X or Y or Z or A or B, I'm not going to vote Labour. So, I mean, I think that it's always a kind of an ongoing thing. I think in the end, the point is this, is that when it comes to bread and butter politics, what the Labour Party can offer in fighting austerity, in public services, in being able to hold our heads high around the world, I mean, all of it. We have a live, a really exciting promise to the people as to what we could do as an alternative. But I appreciate we need to get round the issue of Brexit and we need to move on, because I do think there is another way to this. You know, I came this morning from a new shelter that we've just opened in my constituency for the homeless. You know, people sleeping on the streets and feel we're just dealing with Brexit and there are all of these other pressing issues and they are not being, there's no bandwidth for dealing with it. And we are the alternative, and we could be a good alternative government. When we get a chance to talk about this, then I think people listen and go, yes.
Can I just very quickly say that the Conservatives have lost 13 seats in Surrey Heath. Now, 2 more loses them the council, and this is, of course, Michael Gove's area. So 18 seats have been declared so far, so that is quite a story.
What's your thoughts on that, Helen?
I mean, I know from campaigning in some of my area and other parts in the South East, we were expecting that we were going to get bad results in the South. It was going to be really difficult for us in some of these areas. And yeah, it fits with what we've always predicted, that today was going to give us some difficult results for the Conservatives.
But in a place like Surrey Heath, what would be the factors there? What would that be about? Would that be about the national picture?
I mean, I think it might well be. So, I mean, clearly it would be good to know exactly how that area voted in the referendum. And for instance, is this again a reflection of Leave versus Remain votes? Is it a reflection of some Conservative voters who voted Leave staying at home because we haven't left yet? That would be the things I would expect to be part of that picture.
I've just pointed out to viewers that you'll be leaving us quite soon, I'm sorry to say. So let's have a final contribution from you now, taking the Surrey Heath picture, and Emily, behave yourself.
I haven't seen any good Prosecco. No, I was not.
Go get us some.
So
no Prosecco around here.
English wine. We'll get it sorted for 4.
Come on.
Dear me. Okay, no Prosecco for you, it'll be Carver. So listen, just a final thought on where you are. The Surrey Heath thing is obviously very interesting as well.
Well, I mean, to interpret that a little bit, I was talking to some of our activists in Surrey Heath. They were hoping to make 6 gains. They've made, I don't know, 13 gains. that does suggest that it's not just about local issues, because they were campaigning on local issues in some of those wards as well as Brexit. Some of those people who weren't really getting much Liberal Democrat campaigning have chosen to vote Liberal Democrat and against the Conservatives because of other issues, and that does suggest some of those national issues. And I come back to the point that I made at the beginning, given that you're wishing me to leave in a second, Huw.
I'm not wishing.
I wanted to make the point that the Prime Minister is trying to interpret last night as a message to get on with Brexit, as I said before. I think that is the wrong interpretation. And if we're going to think about this as we get back to Parliament, we think about the way forward, I think the British people said stop Brexit last night. It's clear on the parties that gained. They were the ones who were against Brexit. The Brexit parties, Labour and the Tories and UKIP, lost. That is the simple message. And I think, you know, in elections you can complicate things. You can do all lots of different analyses. But I think the basic message is there. And it was a fantastic night for the Liberal Democrats. John Curtis has tried to sort of say it wasn't quite as good, but actually in seats gained, council seats gained across the country, it may be one of our best nights ever. We've got a smile on our face. And I think, you know, when we come to the European elections, so we'll do in 20 days' time, we'll get some sleep between now and then, I hope. When we come to those European elections, we'll see what happens. But Liberal Democrats are clearly the Remain party across the country, and will be saying in those European elections, if you want to stop Brexit, vote Liberal Democrat again. And there were obviously people in parts of the country who didn't have local elections last night. I'm pleased that we're going to give them the opportunity in London, where I represent, Wales and Scotland and other parts of the country that didn't have local elections. They'll be able to send a message to the Conservatives and Labour Party. We want to stop Brexit.
Good to have you with us, Ed. Thanks very much, and we'll see you again. Thanks for your company. Ed Davey there for the Lib Dems. What I'd like to do is keep tabs on what's going on in York and in Thanet. If we go to York, it's Gemma Dillon, our correspondent there. Gemma, what's going on?
Well, a different council, but a very similar picture as elsewhere in the country. We've got Conservatives looking glum, Labour likewise, Lib Dems and the Green Party fairly confident. Now, York is different in that back in 2015, it was a three-way tie, really, between the Labour Party, the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats. The Liberal Democrats' vote here in York held up in 2015, and although there was no overall control for the authority as a whole, the Liberal Democrats have been running the authority with the Conservatives since 2015. So talk of votes going to them as a protest vote, here in York they don't see that. They have always seen themselves as a credible alternative to the two other parties, to Labour and Conservatives. Looking around, I can see Labour councillors have been telling me that out on the campaign trail for the first time they've faced real abuse and anger. The Conservatives likewise. Now, what is interesting again here in York is it was one of the places in Yorkshire that voted to remain. 58% in the referendum, 58% of people voted to remain in the city. So perhaps another indication of why the Liberal Democrats, with their clear message on Brexit, that they want to remain in Europe, have been able to pick up some of those votes. Conservatives so far have lost 2 seats and the Liberal Democrats have gained 3. The Conservatives are being pushed close in several wards. I believe their deputy leader is in trouble in his ward. He currently sits with 2 other Conservative councillors. There are rumours washing round the floor, as they always do, that all 3 Conservative councillors could lose their seats. Likewise, if you look to the Labour leadership in the city, Janet Looker, her seat is under threat from the Green Party. So that's the leader of both the Conservative group, deputy leader, of the Conservative group here in York under threat, and the leader of the Labour group under threat. Meanwhile, the leader of the Liberal Democrat group, he's been returned as a Liberal Democrat councillor, I think 5 times. Now he's got quite a comfortable majority in his seat. What will be interesting at the end of the day is how those numbers stack up. Will the Liberal Democrats have been able to make enough ground to get overall control of the council, or will they have to fall back and form a coalition with someone? Will they turn to the Conservative councillors that remain and form a similar coalition again? Or will the Labour group be in a position to be forming a coalition, perhaps looking to the Green Party? The Green Party are hopeful to capitalise, of course, on the climate change issue. We've seen a lot of nationally with Extinction Rebellion. Whether that means that they'll break through in some wards, we don't know. I can tell you as well that voter turnout here in the city has been around 40%, so higher than we were expecting. I think the last election with a similar, where it was just local elections rather than the general election as well, turnout was 30. So turnout held up, still an unclear picture, but Conservatives looking very glum.
Gemma, thank you very much for that update there in York. Gemma Dillon for us. Let's go down to Kent and go to Thanet, which of course is where UKIP had its only council until there were lots of defections, and then it was a Conservative minority administration. It's Ellie there for us, Ellie Price. Ellie, what's going on?
Well, Huw, as you say, this was a Tory minority-led council, but it was the halcyon days, of course, of UKIP that we all remember. Now, we've only had 3 or 4 seats, wards being declared so far, but I don't need a crystal ball to tell you that the story here is about the collapse of UKIP. Cast your memory back to 2015, those heady days of UKIP power when Nigel Farage was down here in Thanet sort of almost every week. He was, of course, campaigning for the parliamentary seat here. In fact, the party even held their conference right here in the Winter Gardens. Now, we know Nigel Farage didn't win that parliamentary seat, but UKIP did very well. They swept to power here on the council by a comfortable margin and took control. Fast forward to last year, after a number of defections and then a big row about the future of Manston Airport and what should happen to it. We saw 12 councillors from UKIP defect, and the leader stepped down, and of course the Conservatives then took control of it. So the question here is not about the margins by which UKIP are losing support. The question is, where does the vote go? Now, we're hearing that Labour are doing quite well here so far. Of those 3 or 4 wards that have been declared, we hear that Labour have picked up 5 seats, and it's true to say, I think, that the Conservatives are hardly confident about their chances. I've spoken to a couple of senior Tories here who say that they're quite pleased that neither UKIP nor indeed Nigel Farage's Brexit party got their act together and managed to field any candidates in time for the local elections, because they feel that they would have certainly hemorrhaged votes to both of those parties. So they're happy about that. And they also say they're very concerned about what might happen in the European elections, of course, in a couple of weeks' time. One Tory told me that Conservative members here in South Thanet, a number of them, won't even campaign for the Conservatives nationally in those elections. They will, in fact, support the Brexit party. Now, Bob Bayford, who is the leader of the Conservative group here, he held on to his seat. But in his speech, he said that he felt that this was one of the strangest elections he'd ever seen. Now, given what's been happening to the Conservatives in the southeast, bear in mind the Conservatives have lost control down in Folkestone, and the leader of Canterbury City Council has just lost his seat, then I think that could be putting it mildly.
Certainly, and good to have the update there in Thanet. Ellie, thank you very much. Ellie Price there for us. And I'm pleased to say that Jonathan Bartley from the Greens has joined us. Jonathan, welcome. Nice to have you with us. We'll get some comments from you on your performance in a second. What I'd like to ask, first of all, is for Rita to take us through some of the latest results.
Huw, these results are all examples of councils where the main party, either Labour or the Conservatives, have lost control of the council, and give you an indication of what has happened in this election and why it is that the 2 main parties' share of the vote has gone down quite so dramatically. So, for example, Baber in Suffolk, Malvern Hills in Worcestershire, Warwick and Mendip, these were all Conservative councils that have now become hung councils. They're now in no overall control, as you can see from the fact that they are in grey. I just want to go into Mendip for you to show you what happened there. And as you can see, familiar tale now, a Liberal Democrat surge here against the Conservatives. This is a hung council. The Liberal Democrats were short by 2, so they didn't take the council entirely. But let me just show you the seat change here. Conservatives lost 22 seats, Liberal Democrats picking up 11, and the Greens and Independents doing well as well. So this was a council where the Conservatives had a majority of 17. Now they've lost control of that council. Similar tale for Labour in Darlington and Stockton-on-Tees. These were Labour-controlled councils. They've now gone into no overall control. They're still counting in Surrey Heath. As you can see, it's white, so that means that they are still counting. This was a Conservative council, but look what's happened. The winning post is 18, 17 to declare, and so far the Conservatives are on 3. So it is possible that the Conservatives could lose control of Surrey Heath. We'll be watching this one. Surrey Heath, the House of Commons seat, is held by Michael Gove. His majority is rock solid. It's over 20,000. But still, this is very interesting. Conservatives losing 13 seats here. Liberal Democrats putting on 9, and the Independents and Greens as well. And just one more to show you on this screen. Mole Valley, this is in Dorking in Surrey, and this is a Liberal Democrat gain from the Conservatives. Liberal Democrats on 22 seats, Conservatives on 12, Independents on 7. And we'll just take a quick look at the seat change. You can see what's happened. 10 Conservative seats just been divided up. Lion's share going to the Liberal Democrats and 1 to an Independent.
Rita, thanks very much. I mean, you've kind of got to pinch yourself a bit, haven't you, Vicky? You know, Surrey Heath.
It's been Tory since 1973.
I mean, it's just... That's a bit of an earthquake, surely, and, you know...
I mean, I think these results for the Conservatives are going to end up being worse than actually they expected. Now, there was a lot of expectation management going on around Westminster, with people talking about losing 600 seats, 700 seats. I don't know where we are at the moment. We're up to 795 losses there for the Conservatives, and could be a lot higher. But, you know, I think it might be worse. And it's happening in those kind of places, which I think people maybe hadn't quite realised. And I think the interesting thing about the Liberal Democrat revival, if it is one and if it's translated into a general election, remember that the Conservatives won in 2017 partly by destroying the Liberal Democrats, taking them out in 2015, 2017. And so if there is some kind of clawing back by that party, particularly in the southwest of England, you know, that makes it very hard for the Conservatives to win any kind of majority. So that's why it is significant where the Liberal Democrats are winning and, you know, where the Conservatives are losing.
The Greens on 121 gains, Jonathan, so far, which is pretty spectacular. What are the factors behind that?
Yeah, it's phenomenal, Huw. It exceeds our expectations. I think we've been targeting very, very hard. We knew where a lot of these gains were going to come from. We were expecting a lot of them. But I think we've had an uplift as well. First of all, because of what's happened over the last few weeks in terms of the prominence of climate change. Extinction Rebellion, the Attenborough documentary, the Committee on Climate Change report that just came out. You know, people realising that there is a climate emergency. And of course, our councillors have been working up and down the country to get climate emergency motions passed on councils over the last 6 months. I think we're up to 60, 70 councils now that have done that. So having that bottom-up work. And of course, being a Remain party. You know, one of the lessons I think of this election is that if you fudge, you lose. You know, it's come across very, very clearly. And we have gained an uplift from that. We're unequivocally pro-Remain, we're pro-People's Vote, and actually we have 3 times as many MEPs in the European Parliament as the Liberal Democrats do at the moment. So I would challenge the claim that was made earlier that the Lib Dems are the Remain party. Actually, we've got more MEPs in the European Parliament, and we are also a Stop Brexit party, and we have benefited from that. But more than anything, I think it's the hard work of the councillors in the town hall. People have realised that when you get Greens elected, you know, obviously the first past the post system has been a barrier to us for a long, long time. But when we have got Greens elected, people have seen that Greens do make a difference. A Green in the town hall, a Green at the table brings a completely fresh perspective. And right now, it's one of the most powerful votes that you can cast.
Your fudge comment was directed at Emily and Labour, was it?
Both, yeah. Well, both. I mean, I think, you know, this phrase, a plague on all your houses, that's been bandied around for the last 24 hours. It's very clear there is that sentiment, but the Prime Minister's statement earlier at the Welsh conference to say that somehow this is a message, by voting for Remain parties, voters are sending a message that you need to get on with Brexit. I mean, that's just absurd. It's naive. You know, you don't vote for Remain parties to tell people to get on with Brexit. But there is a real anger. And with the breakdown, as we just heard from John Curtis, with the vote share of the 2 big parties going down to 58%, this is actually part of a long-term trend, and we need to put it in perspective. So in the 1950s, 90% of people were voting for the two big parties, and that's gone down and down and down. And even the 1997 Blair landslide was, with that 180-seat majority in the House of Commons, was only the votes. Let me just finish.
What about the 2017 general election?
Well, yeah, I'll come to that in a sec. Okay. Was from the votes of 1 in 5 people. It's astonishing that 180-seat majority in the House of Commons in 1997 was only from the votes of 1 in 5.
And 2017?
And 2017, everyone said it's changing. That downward trend that we've seen for the last few decades is changing. It was a snap election. It was clearly now a blip. And those people that said, suddenly we're going back to a two-party system, that is clearly nonsense. And I think these elections are showing that.
Why did you say no like that, Emily?
Because I think that the issue is Brexit. I think that the issue is Brexit and the need that people have for it to be resolved. And that's why we need to have a bit of foresight and be able to think through how we're going to get through this. Because at the moment, the only deal that's on the table is one that we think is going to cause economic uncertainty and is going to result in people losing their jobs. That's why we're against it. But we want to be able to try to resolve it in some way, and we need to move on. We cannot continue like this. We cannot continue to be laughed at by the world. And we cannot continue to be doing the damage that we're doing to our society and to our economy. There must be movement, and we must find a way of breaking the logjam. And frankly, it isn't Theresa May's deal. So, we've just got to stop that fantasy and work out another way of getting through it. And then we can go back to the big issues, the other big issues that really affect people's lives. And frankly, that was what we were talking about in 2017. That's why Labour was so close to winning the general election then.
Helen, I'll bring you in a second. I promise I will. There's obviously a useful green theme for me because there's counting going on in Brighton, and obviously there's a lot of interest in the green vote in Brighton as well. So what I'd like to do is bring in John, our correspondent there in Brighton, and John Young. John, tell us what's going on. What's your reading of things there at the moment? Are you getting any signals from party workers there?
Yes, Huw, and the signals are...
Oh, right. That was a bit annoying, wasn't it?
Can we talk about Kent
because
instead?
John's been waiting patiently for a long time to talk to us. And Brighton is a very interesting place for us to keep our tabs on. But as soon as John comes back, we'll be with him straight away. What were you saying?
I was just saying, can we talk about Kent?
I'm happy to pick up on...
Yeah, we'll talk about Kent, yeah.
It's funny sitting beside you here, Emily. I think I do feel that there's quite a lot of common ground in where we are, as in both you speaking for Labour and me speaking for the Conservatives, wanting us to move on through Brexit, and both of our parties trying to represent the whole country, I think, and having voters who in the past voted for us but who have voted Leave or who voted Remain, and trying for us, therefore, to honour the referendum result, but also with an agreement that looks after the economy. I mean, that's certainly what I want to see us do. And I do sincerely hope that in the weeks ahead, then we will be able to come to a compromise agreement.
I mean, I hear you, Helen,
but
but the difficulty is, remember that speech that Theresa May made to the Tory party conference when she was first elected, and she put down so many red lines, and they were contrary to the interests of the British economy and to jobs. And she may have been trying to move back from that, but she's not a woman who compromises. And the deal that you have on the table is not one that we could ever agree to, and you know that, and you're not prepared to move and you're not prepared to compromise. So what do we do?
Huw, even if they do thrash out a deal in some miraculous way, there is no way it's going to get through the House of Commons. You're going to lose the right wing of the Conservative Party if you capitulate to Labour. You've got to take the Labour backbenchers with you as well. There is only one way out of this mess, and I think everyone is realising it, and that's you've got to have more democracy. You've got to take it back to the people. Give it to the people and put it to a vote.
Take what back to the people? Are you saying...
You take the deal that has been agreed back to the people with an option to remain if they don't want to have it.
Yeah. But if you do that, to me, I mean, the whole question about another referendum, people's votes, however you describe it, the big question is actually what the question is. So do you just offer those two options? But actually, what about people who voted to leave and who think that no deal is their model of leaving? So I've heard huge anger from some Leave voters if they were given that option.
So let's put this in the wider context.
I think we will need to have... No, we end up in this whole debate about what the question is, which in its own right isn't an easy one.
So we come back to the political system. I think we will all probably agree, well, maybe we won't, but I hope we will, that the political system is in a terrible state at the moment. It is broken. And we have this kind of winner-takes-all sense of democracy, this first-past-the-post system, which frankly isn't fit for purpose in the modern world.
We're talking about the referendum, though.
So, well, let's talk about the referendum. So it's exactly it. The idea was that, right, you voted, even though it was a very close margin, so the 48% can go to hell.
The new referendum. What do you want to do with the new referendum?
I'll come to that.
Nobody's saying that about... Well,
no, this has been the attitude of the government. The 48% can go to hell. Leave it in our hands. We'll negotiate the deal. We won't engage with the 48%. And then we'll sort it out. And people have said,
the whole approach has been to try and come up with an agreement which recognises the 48% as well as the 52%.
How has the population been involved in that process?
Not really.
Hence, for instance, the attempt to build ourselves a close future relationship with the European Union, which has friction-free trade as much as we can.
Real democracy is what happens between elections, not just at elections. And just to have a referendum say, right, the 48% can suck it up.
You keep saying that. That's
where was the consultation?
Not the attitude.
Where was the engagement with the population as a whole? It just said, leave it up to us, we'll come back with a deal. And is it any surprise that you can't get it through the House of Commons?
That's exactly what the deal is.
We need a participatory form of democracy, and that's why I want to put it in the wider context. What's happening across Europe right now is a fragmenting system where you're getting massive political realignment, and often in places like Germany, you're seeing these massive rises of the Green Party against far-right parties. The old political alignments are breaking down. The old political fault lines are breaking down. And we don't see it because we're so obsessed with Brexit in this country.
But Jonathan,
but it's happening, and we need to wake up to it.
The starting point was, what do you think, what do the Greens think should be if you think that there should be a second referendum, right? What do you guys say should be on the ballot paper? So you say there should be Theresa May's deal and remain, and so you don't think there should be no deal?
No, I don't think there should be no deal. I think it would be an absolute disaster to even contemplate having that on the ballot paper.
But you will get some people incredibly angry about that option. And there's an argument to say, well, the country already voted to leave, so some people say Remain shouldn't be on the order paper at all.
We've had the negotiations, we've had the deal has been put together, and now it is the choice, do you want the deal? No, we weren't given a prospectus in the referendum, weren't we? We weren't told us, we were given like a blank sheet of paper. No one described what it was going to mean. No one went into the complexities of the Irish backstop. No one went into the difference between the custom union and the single market in any great detail. Certainly, my family voted leave. Okay. They weren't familiar with these.
I don't think we should be afraid of just asking the people, did you vote for this? Is this what you want? Because if this is what before we do this, can we just have it confirmed? Because it is such a long way.
Let's pause there for a second, because we've got Brighton back up again, and John is there. John, sorry, we were cut off. You were telling us about the count there. We were talking about the Greens, but also, of course, about the other parties there in Brighton. So what does it look like?
Well, the rumour is the optimism is all with the Greens here, Huw, at the moment. Very early days. We've only had one actual result out of 21 wards, but the Greens are optimistic. They're telling me they think they could possibly even be leading the council again as of next week. And I say again because back in 2011 they became the first council in the country to have a Green-led authority. Now, that would obviously be a headline. That would obviously encourage your Green guest in the studio there. Why is it happening, though? It's back to those national issues. There's a sense from Labour and the Conservatives that the Brexit situation has damaged the Conservatives, and the anti-Semitism row has seeped into Brighton and damaged Labour. Of course, Green's success in the South East isn't a particularly unusual thing. Folkestone and Hythe have just voted in six councillors. Green policies are often popular in Lewis, and we have the only Green MP here, Caroline Lucas, in Brighton Pavilion. Final thought, interestingly, if the Greens do take control, or at least lead the council in future, suddenly the issues we may be debating may no longer be Brexit and do we have another referendum and all those things. We may be back to local issues, because the Green Party got into all sorts of trouble when they ran the council over recycling and waste disposal issues, and suddenly the focus was on local issues in local elections rather than the national ones we've been hearing about.
Well, what clues have they given already then, John, about the way that they would do things differently to the last time when, as you say, there were some difficulties there?
I think they're taking soundings and they don't want to commit to anything. I had a chat before we came on camera with the Green leader who was keeping his cards close to his chest, but he was saying, look, we will have to do things differently. We will have to learn from what happened in the past. We've got to fly the flag for Green success. And it caused all sorts of tension and awkwardness. You had Caroline Lucas, the MP, as I say, the only Green MP in Westminster, and yet a Green authority who I think it's fair to say she was frustrated by. So we here certainly in the local area will be watching that one closely if and when it happens.
John, thanks very much. Good to talk to you. John Young there for us in Brighton. We're going to have a look at the weather in just a couple of minutes, but before that, Vicky, your thoughts about where we stand and what else you've been picking up in the last few minutes?
Yeah, we have just heard that Labour has lost Middlesbrough, so that's another council loss there for Labour, and that point really, you know, a very disappointing set of results for the Labour Party. They've lost Darlington, Middlesbrough, Cannock Chase. They would want to be making gains, not going backwards at this point if they are to have a serious chance of becoming the government. But, you know, not as bad as the Conservative results, pretty appalling for them. It looks like it might be even worse than their worst fears, losing hundreds and hundreds of seats. And the example we talked about just now, you know, Surrey Heath, it's been Conservative since 1973. They are losing a lot of seats in places like that as well. The Lib Dems, the main beneficiaries, an excellent set of results, albeit from obviously a low base. They've had a terrible time in the last few years. They're building on that local councillor base. I mean, the big question for them, as ever, can they translate that into parliamentary seats? And that, at the moment, is what we don't know. And interestingly, turnout has not fallen through the floor as some people thought. And this idea that there would be apathy doesn't seem to be that. It seems that there's an appetite for something different than the two main parties.
Worth just reminding ourselves as well that there have been 6 mayoral contests taking place, executive mayoral contests. In Mansfield, battle royal there between an independent called Kate Allsop and the Labour candidate Andy Abrahams. That has now gone to a second recount. So there's been a lot of tense political fighting going on there in Mansfield. We're now, it's very, very close, and a second recount between the independent Kate Allsop and the Labour candidate Andy Abrahams will bring the latest on that as we get it. Let's have a look at the scoreboard once again before we have a look at today's weather, the day after local election day. And this is where we are right now. The Conservatives looking at losses of 842 and counting. Labour looking at losses of 91. The Lib Dems now looking at 491, and that is, I think I'm right in saying that is their best ever gain in a local election, local council election. The Greens have put on 124, and the Independents have put on 380. So that's the picture for you at this BBC election special. Let's join Stav for today's weather.
Hello there. Well, as you've probably already heard, it's going to be pretty cool for this May Day bank holiday. Not a washout by any means, but certainly not a hot and sunny one like we saw last year with record-breaking highs of 29 Celsius, which was reached at Northolt in northwest London. This May Day is looking much cooler. 12 or 13 degrees will be the high, with quite a bit of cloud around too. It could be a record breaker for the wrong reasons, perhaps. But we've got a cold front sinking southwards. That's introducing the cooler air as we head through the course of today. The Arctic air pouring out southwards right across Scotland, Northern Ireland and into parts of northern England means temperatures by the end of the day will be struggling to get much above 7 to 9 Celsius. But still the last of the mild air across the south with a few showers here. But as the cold front continues to move southwards, it'll take its cloud and showers with it. Although I think by the end of the night we should hold on to some cloud here. So overnight lows of 5 to 7 degrees, but further north there will be a widespread light frost, and watch out for some early ice too. So it's going to be a cold start to Saturday morning. Plenty of sunshine around, mind you, but it's going to be windy. Those winds touching gale force across exposed coasts and over hills of north and east Scotland, feeding showers into many central and eastern areas. A few getting into western parts of England as well, and they will have a wintry flavour to them, maybe some soft hail, even sleet down to lower levels too. And it's going to feel disappointingly cold and raw along the east coast. Top temperatures across western areas, maybe 13 or 14 degrees. Now, high pressure builds in as we head on into Sunday, so that will kill off the showers, and also the winds will ease down, although it will stay quite windy and quite showery across the Northern Isles and the far northeast of Scotland. We start off with the sunshine on Sunday, but it's looking likely that we'll see clouds building up into the afternoon, so it could be quite a cool grey afternoon, top temperatures of 10 to maybe 13 degrees. That is well below the seasonal average. As we head on into the bank holiday Monday, we see this front spread southwards, certainly during Sunday night. So by Monday, it'll be lying through central areas, we think, and could produce thicker cloud, a few showery bursts of rain as well. So rather cloudy skies, I think, for England and Wales. Further north, another cold one with sunshine and showers.
There are many movies out at the moment that are claiming to be comedies. This beats all of them. And on the one hand, it's a political tale. On the other hand, it is a magic, realist fable. It is baggy and overlong. You can either just see it as a really good popcorn adventure or as something much deeper. That's what a proper cult movie looks like. My problem with it is I wanted it to be darker. The script is laughable, but not in a good way. This has proved so divisive. I was reminded of the friendship between Elliot and E.T. Every time anyone says mockumentary, immediately think, is it as good as Spinal Tap? The answer is no. Very smartly reinvented a franchise, and who thought that was possible? It does the thing that cinema is meant to do at its very best, to completely immerse you, to transport you, to take you to another world.
Words of Wisdom, the film review, today at 5:45 on the BBC News Channel.
We need double-time recovery right now.
In a world of complex global news stories, we'll sift through the information to bring you what matters most. And with reaction and reporting in real time,
Our immigration laws are a laughingstock all over the world.
you'll know what's happening around the world as we do.
And that these new measures won't actually stop Venezuelans coming over, it will just make the migrant crisis worse.
Whatever the story, we'll piece it together on Outside Source. Join me, Ros Atkins, tonight at 9 on the BBC News Channel.
Yes, a good afternoon and a welcome back to the BBC's Election Centre, where it does look like voters have punished both Labour and the Conservatives. Yes, indeed. Good afternoon. Welcome to viewers on BBC One to the BBC's Election Centre, our coverage of the local elections in England and in Northern Ireland. We've had almost 3/4 of the results in for the local elections. They make rather painful reading, it must be said, for Conservatives and Labour. But the Lib Dems have been the main beneficiaries so far. Look at this.
Part of a Liberal Democrat majority!
They have made gains of almost 500 seats so far, and they say that they've won overall control of places like Winchester, Bath, Mole Valley and North Norfolk. And not forgetting Chelmsford, where the Lib Dem leader Sir Vince Cable was there this morning, congratulating his party supporters. He said it'd been a brilliant result for his party. But the Conservatives are feeling the pain. They're already down 850 or so seats. There's still a way to go. They gained Walsall, it must be said, but lost control of more than 30 councils, including Worcester, Peterborough and St Albans. And the Prime Minister, Theresa May, is in mid-Wales. She's been talking to the Welsh Conservatives at the Spring Conference. She said voters had sent a clear message, in her view, to get on and deliver Brexit. Labour no doubt will be disappointed not to have done better than they have done. Jeremy Corbyn in Trafford this morning because that was a gain from the Conservatives. But it's lost Bolsover, Wirral and Darlington. Overall, they're down by 90 seats.
There are about 60 councils still counting this afternoon, and I'll be here by the giant touchscreen analysing the results as they come in.
We're also joined by Vicky Young, our chief political correspondent, with her expert analysis and take on what's going on, especially in the wider political picture with the Brexit stalemate at Westminster. So, stay with us for election 2019. So So 182 councils declared, just 66 to go. The picture now is pretty clear, and we're just following that narrative. There are some 5,500 council seats already declared, some 2,700 to go. So still a chunk to come. Counts still going on around the country. Let's take a look at a few of them. This is Thanet in Kent. We'll talk about this in a moment. This was a UKIP win 4 years ago, but has since slipped into no overall control after lots of UKIP defections. So we're keeping an eye on Thanet to see what happens there. And then we'll also look at York, because this is currently run by a Conservative Lib Dem minority administration. In the past hour, our reporter there has been telling us the Conservatives are looking rather fearful of the result in York, so we'll see what happens in the city of York as that goes on as well. Let me introduce my guests, because we have Jonathan Bartley, the co-leader of the Green Party, we have the Shadow Foreign Secretary Labour's Emily Thornberry, and we have the Conservative Party Deputy Chair Helen Whately. Good to have the three of you with us. Thank you very much. Let's just have a quick look at the scoreboard so that we know exactly where we stand at 3:33 in the afternoon on Friday. And here we are, the Conservatives currently on 848 losses, Labour on 90 losses. The Lib Dems, for them, a record gain of 495. The Greens having put on 124, and the Independents having gained 383. So those are the headline figures for you. And with that, we'll join Carrie for the day's news.
Thank you, Hugh. Yes. Hello, here's a summary of the news. And the Conservatives and Labour parties have suffered a backlash in the local elections, with voters apparently punishing them for the Brexit deadlock. Both have seen significant losses, and the main winners are small parties like the Liberal Democrats and the Greens, as well as independent candidates. The Prime Minister says voters are showing that they want politicians to get on and deliver Brexit. Here's our political correspondent, Nick Eardley.
The 2nd of May 2019.
Glum faces all round. This has not been a good result for the two biggest parties. Counting continues, but the Tories have lost more than 750 councillors so far, giving up control in St Albans, Southend, Peterborough and elsewhere. As the Prime Minister turned up to address members in Wales, some were less than impressed.
Thank you, everybody. And
why don't you resign? The National Convention want you, we don't want you.
With Tory losses mounting up, Mrs May had this assessment.
I think there was a simple message from yesterday's elections to both us and the Labour Party. Just get on and deliver Brexit.
But some think the PM herself is part of the problem.
Many of my constituents have said this to me, we need change. We need a change of leadership.
Tradition dictates the day after elections, party leaders head to where they won. Here's Jeremy Corbyn in Trafford in Greater Manchester. But his party lost control in Hartlepool, the Wirral and Bolsover.
We have won Trafford to an overall majority. We have swings to Labour in a number of boroughs across the whole of councils across the whole of the country, and that gives us a basis on which we can win marginal seats, such as Swindon, such as Thurrock, and other places. And I'm looking forward to an election that we do that.
As things stand, Labour is facing a net loss and calls for a clearer policy on Brexit. Some say deliver, others want another referendum.
My prediction is that we are going to need to go back to the people and we're going to need to say to them, did you vote for this?
On the basis of detailed voting figures in some wards, if the results are replicated across the UK, the Conservatives and Labour would be tied on 28%. The Lib Dems would be on 19%, others would be on 25%. That'll be music to the ears of Liberals. More than 400 councillors up so far, taking control of councils in Bath, Winchester and the Cotswolds.
Well, I'm just celebrating a really great result here. Chelmsford, Essex, but this is a story across the country. You know, the Lib Dems were written off at one point, but we're coming back very, very strongly. We're the big winners of the night.
Independents have done well so far, as has the Green Party.
We've broken through on 16 new councils, really cementing our place as the fourth party in England in local government, and a real momentum, I think, going into the European elections. Of course, we're the biggest representation of any Remain party in the European Parliament at the moment.
Despite anger over Brexit, it's been tough so far for UKIP. They've gone backwards.
Yes, we've lost some seats, but also we've made some gains in Sunderland. We've made a few gains there. And actually, when you look at the results of areas like Sunderland, where we didn't win, we got a lot of second places. So they're good and bad across the board.
There are plenty more results to come, including in Northern Ireland, where counting began this morning. Across the UK, parties are watching closely, trying to figure out what it might mean for their wider fortunes. For Labour and the Tories, commiserations to share, problems to solve. Nick Eddy, BBC News.
Well, counting is also underway in Wales, and meanwhile, in the last few minutes, Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has been speaking in Telford. So let's listen to what he's had to say.
We had an incredible result here in Telford, and well done to the council in Telford and well done to the Labour Party. I'm here in Ironbridge to thank them and congratulate them. I've just come from Trafford, where they're also celebrating, and we've just been in touch with people in Calderdale where we've gained. Yes, across the country, the Conservatives lost about 600 councillors already. We've lost about 90. I'm very sorry about that, and I thank them for their services. There are mixed results across the country, but in many of the marginal constituencies that we have to gain in the general election, we've had some very promising results at a ward level. And so I recognise that Brexit has been something that's very much dominated this campaign, which is essentially issues of local government, but we have to bring people together, and Labour is the only party that appeals to people however they voted in 2016. We don't believe anyone who voted Leave voted to lose their job. We want to bring people together, and hence we put forward the idea of a customs union, market access and protection of rights that we've got from the European Union. Theresa May and her government have fiddled around, didn't even invite me for a meeting until after the original Leave date had passed by. It's got to come back to Parliament, it's got to be resolved quickly.
Jeremy Corbyn. Counting is also underway in Northern Ireland, a total of 462 seats up for grabs there across 11 councils. The first few results have been trickling in, but most are expected later today or on tomorrow morning. There are no elections in Scotland and none in Wales. Well, that's it from our summary, and now back to election 2019.
We'll be back with Carrie a little later, but back here in the election studio, let's just consider what's coming up, because we have that interesting result coming up in Thanet, previously a very big UKIP stronghold, but no longer after all those defections. That's coming up. We've got some other results too. We'll be talking to the Conservative Party Chair Brandon Lewis as well in the next few minutes. So, Vicky, what for you are the themes now that emerge? And, you know, just thinking about, we've talked about performance. By the time we come to the end of today, given that Mrs May's had rather a torrid day as well at the Tory conference in Wales, what will be the principal questions that people are confronting?
I mean, I think a good place to start is Surrey Heath, a Conservative council since 1973. At the moment, they have lost 14 seats, and it looks like they may well lose overall control of that council, which is something I don't think any MP or party manager would have predicted. So it's an appalling set of results for the Conservatives. There's no getting away from that. Now, they will say that they might have expected it. They've been in power for 9 years. It's usual for the party in power to get a bit of a kicking. But, you know, this is a very, very difficult set of results for them, and they're going to have to look at why it's happened. And in the places where the Liberal Democrats are challenging them from second place, there are some big swings towards the Liberal Democrats. So the argument that people want Brexit to be delivered, that's an argument that will be challenged by the Liberal Democrats and by the Greens, who are, of course, very much anti-Brexit parties. They will say that that is not what this is saying. Now, it is difficult to try and guess exactly why people voted the way they did. Of course, lots of people would be voting for local issues, but there's no doubt with Brexit dominating the political agenda that that has definitely had an impact. And we've heard from Labour councillors who've lost their seats. We've heard from Tories too. They are saying that they've been let down by their political masters in Westminster. The deadlock over Brexit is having an impact. But what is interesting is that it's not just harming the Conservatives. It's been also a really disappointing set of results for Labour. They've lost seats like Darlington, Middlesbrough, Cannock Chase. An opposition party, they've been in opposition for 9 years. They're pushing for a general election. They say that is the main thing they want to get. And yet, based on these kind of results, they are not in the place where they are about to seize power. They are still a long way behind in terms of winning seats, winning MPs, and these kind of results are not going to help. They should be a long way ahead of the Conservatives. The clear winners, the Liberal Democrats, an excellent set of results for them, but from a low base. It's worth saying, as we know, since the coalition, they have been in a terrible state, and they have lost hundreds of councillors, so they are clawing their way back, and they are obviously pleased with these results. But for them, as ever, the challenge is whether they can translate local results, local councillors running local councils, can they translate that into winning seats at a general election?
I mean, they've now topped 500 gains, which is remarkable, really, isn't it? It's 503 gains for the Lib Dems, and of course the Greens have had a very good night as well. We should mention that. Just another yardstick for you, which might be useful before we talk to the Conservative chairman, Brandon Lewis. Let's have a look at what we call the projected national share of the vote. This is the figure that we've produced. This is based on the assumption that yesterday's elections would have taken place across Britain. So that's the kind of that's the usefulness of this projected national share, if you like. And there you have it. Look, 28% apiece to the Conservatives and Labour, and very unusual as well to have the two big parties under 30%, but at 28% and the Lib Dems on 19%, the others on 25%, reflecting the fact, of course, there's been a big boost to the Independents and the Greens in these elections. So that's the projected national share. So with that in mind, let's go to Walsall and bring in the Conservative chairman, Brandon Lewis. Brandon, thanks very much for talking to us. I know it's been a very busy night and day for you. Could we have your take then on the way that your party's performed in these local elections?
Sure, look, good evening. We always said this was going to be a tough set of elections for us, coming from that high watermark off the back of the 2015 general election, where we exceeded expectations, up against a Labour Party in opposition looking to make gains, Liberal Democrats coming from a 40-year low, as Vicky outlined earlier on. So we knew this would be a tough night for us. It has been a tough set of elections for us, but there's also within that results like we've seen here in Walsall, in Derbyshire and in Lincolnshire, where Labour are moving backwards, and actually in those areas, good Conservative councillors, good local campaigns, actually winning and gaining votes for the Conservative Party.
When you look at places like Surrey Heath and you look at the losses you've suffered in an area like that, what do you make of it? You know, what is your reading of that, and why do you think that's happened?
Well, I think a couple of things I would say to that. First of all, as I said earlier on, and as Vicky, I think, rightly outlined, you know, the Liberal Democrats in 2015 had come from about 3,100 down to 1,800 seats. They were at a 40-year low. So predictions were from some of the experts that they would gain over 500 seats, and that's what they're doing. That's what was kind of predicted for them. But as well, we are seeing, I think, around the country, people showing that frustration with us that in Parliament we've reached this kind of impasse. And I think it's a very clear message to both the key parties, us and Labour, that we've got to make sure we go forward and deliver on what people voted for back in 2016.
Were you really expecting the losses to be heading for 900 at this point?
Well, I've outlined for some time that I thought this would be a difficult set of elections for us. We were defending roughly 2/3 of the 8,500 councillors that are up for election. These are seats, as I say, we won on a high turnout at a point where we exceeded expectations in 2015. I think, actually, I'm very proud of the fact that as a party as well, we fought 96.5% of the seats around the country. Labour only bothered to field 77% of candidates. But it was always going to be a tough night. It has been a tough night. Losing any councillor is something I'm disappointed about. We've lost some very hard-working councillors. I'm very sad to see them go, and we've got to work hard to give them a chance to come back and get people, good Conservatives in local government, because Conservative councils do deliver more for less. They do it for less council tax, they recycle more, they deliver more frontline services for people.
Have to say, and you know this full well, some of your colleagues in local government who've spoken to us overnight had some very harsh things to say about the government, about the Prime Minister in one or two cases, and about the way that you've handled this entire Brexit process. And they were making the point that, you know, their efforts to deliver the services that you've just described, their efforts have been badly undermined by the way that you've run things at a national level. So is that something that you recognise, and is that something that you apologise to them for?
Oh, absolutely recognise. There's been a huge frustration around the country, both with our councillors, our activists, our members, and the general public. I think we've seen shown through the fact that Parliament's found itself in this impasse. we as parliamentarians have got to find a way through it. We've got to maybe have to move forward from Brexit, deliver on that referendum, but also then move forward to start getting onto those domestic issues and delivering and talking about the issues that are affecting people, about those investments in the NHS, improving education, record job levels. And that's what people want to see us focused on, having delivered on that referendum. Absolutely recognising that, yes.
But moving forward, surely, Chairman, moving forward involves compromise. And time and again, those people dealing with the Prime Minister say that she is not in the mood to compromise in any way, shape or form. So where do you move forward if the will to compromise is not there?
I think if we look back, actually, I'd slightly contradict the comment from the Leader of the Opposition on your programme just a few minutes ago. Actually, when we originally said about talking with Labour, Jeremy Corbyn didn't want to come to meetings. He walked out of another meeting. Fortunately, we've now got Labour talking at the table, having those conversations. I can't prejudge where that will go, but it is, I think, a very clear message to both parties to come together and find a way through to deliver on Brexit. After all, in 2017, it was in the manifesto for both parties to respect that referendum and to leave the European Union. If Labour MPs in Leave constituencies had voted with the Prime Minister over the last few months, we would have already left the European Union by now.
How would you describe the Prime Minister's standing with your party workers up and down the country?
Well, as I said a few minutes ago, actually, I recognise this huge frustration with the fact that Parliament has reached this impasse and not been able to get that deal done to leave the European Union. That obviously focuses through the government, through the Prime Minister. I recognise that, but I can assure you, both we as a government and I know the Prime Minister is absolutely determined to deliver on what people voted for.
I mean, I accept what you're saying clearly. There's a great dissatisfaction with Parliament and the political process. But, you know, you're representing the Conservative Party and you know party workers very well. How would you describe the party workers' attitude to the Prime Minister and your party leader?
Well, I've been all over the country over the last few weeks. I was a party activist and worker long before and for longer than I've been a member of Parliament. And actually, we felt very lucky, and I'm lucky to be chairman of a party with such great members, volunteers, activists, councillors and candidates all over the country who've been working hard. Many of them really do want to see all of us as parliamentarians coming together, supporting the Prime Minister to get this deal done. But I do recognise there are colleagues out there who have strong views about where we are as a government, what the Prime Minister is trying to do in delivering for the EU, and they have strong feelings on the EU. It's no secret in the Conservative Party we've been having a discussion and a debate about our position in the EU for some decades now, but we've got to find a way through that so we can deliver that. But that is something that actually I have to say, as we don't have an outright majority in Parliament, falls upon all of us as MPs, particularly when both the Leave parties did have that in their manifesto.
Just bear with us for a second, Ryan, and a very quick comment from Emily Thornberry on this. What's your response to what he's saying?
Well, I think he's talking a lot of nonsense, really. I think that the idea that there is equivalence between the Conservative loss and the Labour losses is obviously nonsense. You can see it in the numbers, 900 up to 900 and versus 90 is obviously not an equivalence. I think that when he makes the point that 77% of the seats were contested by Labour and the others weren't, obviously he knows, I know, that we're talking about a lot of some of the deepest, most conservative shires that we wouldn't necessarily be expecting to, and we've seen it in some of the results. We just haven't had any Labour councillors there, nor I'm afraid will we necessarily expect it. And I think the truth is that it's been a mixed night for us. We've had some good results, but we've had some, disappointments. And I think the other thing that has to be said is that the Labour vote would seem to have, well, we have lost Labour vote. Like, for example, in Sunderland, we've lost some to UKIP, but we've also had a swing to the Greens and to the Liberal Democrats, which brings me back to the point that I've made throughout this, which is we need to move on from Brexit, which does mean that we need to be grown up about this. We need to be prepared to compromise, and we need to have some proper guarantees. And whatever deal it is that the Conservatives in the end are able to get through Parliament, if they're able to, we should go to a confirmatory ballot so that we can find out from the people, is this really what you want?
OK. Vicky, you have a question for Brandon Lewis.
Yeah, Brandon, I'm just thinking, as chairman of the party, the European elections now is looking almost certain that they will go ahead. And I wondered what your strategy is going to be, given that this has been a terrible set of results for you tonight, and that's without Nigel Farage's Brexit party, who could well do even more damage to you.
Well, on both those points, I would say obviously we go forward now. Once we get the final counts out of the way, obviously then we are looking now towards those European elections that with every day that goes past look more likely that we're going to have to fight. We've got our candidates in place. We're really proud. We've got a really strong set of candidates. And I want to make sure we do all we can to give everybody the opportunity to vote for Conservative. I have a very different view to Emily. One of the reasons why I was very keen that we are represented across the country with that 96.5% coverage was I want to make sure everybody in the country has a chance to vote Conservative. I have to say, I do find it slightly odd to listen to Emily outlining the position for Labour when John McDonnell just earlier, at the start of last night, was saying he expected Labour to make a net gain of over 400. They're actually going backwards. I think that's a pretty dreadful place to be when you're in opposition. But yes, I'm focused on making sure we're giving everybody the opportunity to vote for good representation. For me, I would argue that's Conservatives, and in local government it is Conservatives who deliver for lower council tax, get more potholes fixed, do more on recycling and deliver better for local people.
Brian Lewis, good of you to join us in Walsall. Thank you very much for joining us today on BBC News. And at this point, why don't we look at some of the latest results, because Rita has some of those for us.
Yes, indeed. Huw, these results here, in a way, summarise the sort of election that we've had, that Vicky was talking about earlier. A very disappointing set of results for the Conservatives. Some difficult news also for Labour, and advances being made by the Liberal Democrats and also the Greens and Independents. So just to remind you of how to read these screens, any name that is in grey, that means that that's now a hung council. So Malvern Hills, it used to be Conservative. You can see by the blue flash at the side, that's now gone into no overall control. Staffordshire Moorlands, similarly used to be Conservative, is now a hung council. Mendip in Somerset, in the same position, now a hung council. It used to be Conservative. Now look at this this figure. It's a Conservative loss. The Liberal Democrats were short by 2 seats here. Now the Conservatives used to have a majority of 17 here. Let's just take a look at how the seats have changed. Conservatives lost 22 seats. That will have been very painful for them, and those seats were divided up largely between the Lib Dems and the Greens, but the Independents also picking up 4 seats there. If we go back to the main screen, take a look at the councils that were Labour and have now gone into no overall control. So they include Stockton-on-Tees, Darlington and Middlesbrough, and I'd like to take you into Middlesbrough to have a look at what's happened there. So Middlesbrough, solid Labour territory. This is a council that they held by a majority of 17 before. They've been overtaken as the largest party by Independents. Independents on 23 seats, Labour on 20 and the Conservatives on 3. And again, let's have a little look at the seat change, and that tells the story very starkly, doesn't it? Labour and the Conservatives seats all going to independent councillors. Just take you back to the main screen. So the other part of the election story is those big advances made by the Liberal Democrats. So Mole Valley, that was Conservative before. That's a Liberal Democrat gain. And Tainbridge in the West Country. So this was in no overall control and is now Liberal Democrat. And let's just take a little look at the figures here. So a Liberal Democrat gain with a majority of 5, and look how far ahead they are in terms of seats. Let's have a quick look at the seat change. Conservatives down 19, and their loss is the Liberal Democrats and 4 Independents gain.
Rita, thank you very much. Very soon, I'm very sorry to say, there'll be other people sitting in these 3 chairs. So I think it's right to just have a closing thought from each of you. And Jonathan, what for you is the prime theme that we're taking away from these elections from your point of view?
Well, it's a phenomenal result for the Greens. It's been great to see climate change coming up the agenda. It's clear there is an anger with the 2 big parties, and that has gone to 2 Remain parties have been the beneficiaries of. You can't, if you fudge things, you lose. That's the big message I think the 2 big parties to take away. And it's very all well and good to talk about moving on, but if you don't learn the lessons of an election, then we aren't going to move on very, very quickly. And of course, for us, it has been a vindication. I think we've now had 9 local elections. Well, 8 out of those 9 we've made gains, and this has been a constant grow and grow and grow. We've established ourselves as the 4th party in local government in England. And I would say watch this space. We've got more results to come. It's been a record-breaking night for us. and looking forward to the Euro elections. We're the biggest Remain party in the European Parliament in terms of the UK seats. We have 3 times as many MEPs as the Liberal Democrats, and we'll be looking and asking voters to back us, therefore, in the European elections. We are unequivocally stop Brexit, Remain, and we want a people's vote in order to get there.
Thank you very much. What's your perspective, Helen? You heard Brandon Lewis there, saying the right things in terms of trying to encourage his own party workers, which you'd expect. But what's your take at the end of this? Because it's a difficult day for Theresa May and the party.
A really, really tough day for us. Yes, we knew in advance it was going to be difficult, but now this is a reality. Councillors in my own constituency losing their seats and that happening across the country, and I really, really feel for those hard-working candidates, councillors who are in that situation. I think stepping back, it's so hard when the country is so divided and that Brexit has coloured so much of this election. The takeaway from that is how important it is for us to try and move on to heal some of those divisions. I think we have to do what the 52% voted for and deliver Brexit, but doing so in a way that is clearly listening to the 48% as well. We have to move on and make sure that people know that they are listened to. No, we're listening, but we've got to make sure that's seen and felt in practice.
Emma, your thought at the end of this?
I mean, it's a mixed result, and I do regret where we have lost control of councils. But if you look at it in terms of some of our key marginal constituencies, we can be encouraged that on the results of this, we would win Plymouth Moorview, we would win South Swindon, Thurrock, we'd hold on to Peterborough, where obviously there's going to be an election. And my own, an area that I know well, which is in East Kent, I think there's some really interesting things going on there. Canterbury, as you know, has got a Labour MP for the first time ever. But, we've got 6 councillors in Folkestone, which means we've got the largest Labour group in Medway Council for 20 years. And we're going to be winning some seats, I hope, in Thanet. So there are, that's just like a little snippet. Things are moving. And, we've not done as well as we'd like to, but let's not exaggerate. This is nothing like the bloodbath that the Tories are facing tonight.
We'll discuss with your colleagues when they come in, but thank you very much, the 3 of you, for your company. We were talking about mayoral contests. A very interesting one is North of Tyne, because this is the first elected contest in this new North of Tyne combined authority. Let's look at the figures here, because this is on the first preference votes. This is obviously a different form of voting that we have for these mayoral contests. Jamie Driscoll for Labour in first place on the first preference, and Charlie Holt for the Conservatives in second, and John McCabe for the Independents in third. And then if we look at the percentage share of the vote, because somebody's got to get to 50% to avoid a second round, it's 34% to Labour, 25% to the Tories, 17% to the Independent, which means that we then went on to eliminate those who, other than the top 2, that is, and that's what happened. Labour's Jamie Driscoll won by 76,862 votes, a majority of 16,000 on a turnout of 32%. This is the new North of Tyne elected mayor. So they're winning in the second round, therefore, after the runoff against the Conservative candidate. And I'm pleased to say that Jamie's joining us now. And Jamie, many congratulations to you, first of all. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Hugh.
What was the nature of the campaign that you fought?
Well, we fought our campaign very clearly on the policies. So it was about making sure that people's housing was right, keeping money in the local economy, and the things that people were telling me on the doorstep were bread and butter issues. So we fought very hardly on that.
What were the issues around Mr. Corbyn's leadership? Because that must have come up in some form. Describe the exchanges on that.
Well, actually, by and large, people were more interested in the policies. It wasn't really a big issue on the doorstep.
Well, no, I mean, because Mr. Corbyn is associated with the policies and leadership is a big issue in all elections. So did it not come up at all?
Oh, well, I mean, in the sense that people are very happy that Labour's an anti-austerity party, and I think that more than anything else is what the result shows.
What about on Brexit policy, for example? What were you telling people in the north of Tyne area about Labour's Brexit policy? How were you explaining that?
Well, there was a fairly mixed response. There were some people, why haven't we left already? Some people wanting to stay, remain. But overwhelmingly, I would guess about 80% of the people I spoke to on Brexit, they were saying, can we not just get on with this? Can we not focus on things like the NHS, things like the housing problem we're facing? So I understand that it's a big issue in the media, but you know, people are more bothered about their everyday life. The fact that so many people are working multiple jobs to try and make ends meet and pay their bills.
Well, of course that's important, and you know, Brexit isn't such a big issue just in the media, and I mean, we completely understand that, Jamie. We're not debating that, and the issues you just mentioned are hugely important. But Brexit, of course, as you know full well, will potentially affect lots of those issues in any case. What were you telling people locally about the prospect, for example, of a second referendum on Brexit? What are your perspectives on that?
Well, my personal view on it is that a no-deal Brexit would be really bad for the North East. We would see factories closing, and it's not what anybody wants, certainly not what anyone voted for. But I think we have to take seriously the Brexit process, and it's really important to actually talk to people, you know, both in Europe about what sort of a serious deal can be get. About negotiating now, obviously the Labour Party and the government are negotiating what sort of a Brexit deal is possible. And I think the responsible thing to do is to actually take these negotiations seriously, which, I mean, I'm not involved in them, but I understand is what's happening. And then, and only then, when we know the actual facts of the case, that's the time to be talking about extra votes, you know, people's referendum, whatever it might be. But we're not at that stage. And I know people want a nice clear remain, a nice clear leave line, but I think the responsible thing to do is to negotiate this properly.
Jamie, once again, many congratulations and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Hugh.
Jamie Driscoll there, the new elected mayor for the North of Tyne Combined Authority. Thanks to him for joining us. Anita is still on the green outside Parliament, and it looks a bit blustery and wet. So, Anita, we'll join you, and thank you for waiting patiently to talk to us.
No problem, Hugh. Yes, hopefully the rain will hold off. I'll get straight to getting some more opinion and reaction and interpretation for you. Joining me here on College Green beside Westminster are Femi Olawale from Our Future, Our Choice, and also Tom Harwood from Guido Fawkes. Tom, first of all to you, Theresa May speaking in Wales earlier today, we heard her say that the message from the votes that we're seeing here, the votes and how they've gone not well, you know, for the Conservatives clearly, is that just get on and deliver Brexit. That's what the voters want. But is that the message, do you think, that's being delivered to the Conservative Party?
I think there's a deeper message that was probably more expressed through the words of the heckler who protested during that speech than the words of the Prime Minister herself. There has been an absolute tsunami of really animosity towards the Conservative Party right across the country. Actually, in the seats that the Tories have picked up, even in places like the North East, it's where their vote has fallen, but fallen by slightly less than the Labour parties. This is an incredible election where the whole British public has really put two fingers up at both major parties, and you can really see why. With the absolute prevarication that we have been stuck in, this stasis that we find ourselves in, it is an absolute disgrace that 3 years ago people voted to leave the European Union, and that decision has not been enacted yet. So really it should come as no surprise that the two main parties that committed to enacting that decision in the election 2 years ago, that they failed to deliver on their commitments. It's no surprise that they're being absolutely punished.
Femi, what's your interpretation of what we're seeing?
Well, I mean, the basic interpretation is if you look at the board, the Lib Dems and the Greens, the two parties that support a referendum on the Brexit deal, went up by about 600 councillors, whereas the Tories and Labour have lost about 1,000 between them. You can see it quite clearly, and the one thing that's uniting the country is we have seen The majority of politicians spend the last 3 years ignoring all of the issues that people really care about that affect people's lives. The NHS, investing in those areas that have been forgotten. None of that is being addressed because of Brexit. And the two parties have spent the last 3 years focusing on something completely undeliverable.
But does the vote reflect perhaps an ongoing split in the country, certainly an ongoing split amongst MPs?
Well, yeah. I mean, we have parties that are saying we need a referendum on this deal, but we need to be really clear. There is no Brexit that people will actually get behind, because the deal that they've negotiated is so terrible that nobody wants it. On
Tom,
either side.
Tom, you're shaking your head.
Well, that's patently not true. Parliament has voted for a deal. They voted for the Brady Amendment. They voted for basically the withdrawal agreement, but with alternative arrangements to deal with the Northern Ireland border issue.
Doesn't exist.
Let's just try and focus a little bit more closely on today, though.
Yes.
What does today mean for how Brexit proceeds from here, with the European elections, of course, coming up fast?
Well, I think today puts a marker down, really. We saw that there were no Change UK, the independent group, Remain Alliance, whatever you want to call them, candidates standing yesterday. Similarly, there were no Brexit Party candidates standing yesterday. And also, across most of the country, across great swathes of the country, there weren't even UKIP candidates standing. So there weren't many places that the voters could express their anger. In many places, Brexiteers have actually conversely opted for parties that ostensibly are Remain parties, just to vent their anger at the main parties. We've seen this in the northeast, in heavily Brexit areas, returning Lib Dems, for example, who campaigned on local issues rather than European issues.
Is it just a protest vote, though? Obviously, local issues do come to play in
local
local
elections,
elections, clearly, but this has been very much about the national issue of Brexit as well. But Femi, do you think it's just been a protest vote where the Lib Dems and Greens and others have done so well?
They've done well because they've actually been clear, whereas neither the two parties have been clear. Neither the two main parties have been clear. You've got the Tories standing behind a deal that most Brexit voters do not want, a deal that means that we follow the rules of the EU but give up our dominant position in setting those rules. And you've got Labour basically trying to do a fudge. They tried a fudge in 2017 in the general election, and that sort of worked, and they got a relative victory. Now people are saying, hang on, we were supposed to leave it in March. Labour's still not coming down properly on either side of this thing. We need a people's vote. That's the only way forward.
Just one line of response from you, Tom.
It's
That's all
a
we've got
very
time
Westminster interpretation to say that the people of Sunderland voted for the Lib Dems for a second referendum. We've seen the literature. They were talking about local issues. They were talking about waste from Labour councillors. They were talking about expenses. They were not talking about Europe.
And that's the thing. People actually want to get on with the real stuff that needs to be done.
So let's leave so we can sort it out.
And then spend the next 10 years negotiating a deal.
Femi, Tom,
we won't get
sorry.
onto those things.
We are out of time.
Cheers.
We can continue this conversation off air, but we are out of time for the moment. Femi Oluwelu from Our Future, Our Choice, and Tom Harwood from Guido Fawkes. Back to you, Huw.
Anita, thank you very much, and for the lively debate at Westminster on the Green. Can I introduce my new panel? Very kindly joining us, we have Alex Phillips from the Brexit Party, the new Brexit Party. We have the Shadow Trade Secretary, Labour's Barry Gardner, who, for reasons I can't quite work out, has come back for a second visit.
I'm your old panel and your new panel.
Nice to see you, Barry. And we have the Employment Minister, the Conservative, Alok Sharma, as well. It's great to have the three of you with us. Thank you very much. Vicky's still with me, of course, and we're keeping an eye on the counts that are still going on. So we're currently in a position where we have 197 councils declared with 51 to go, and we have 6,200 councillors already elected, but some 2,000 yet to be filled. So, you know, we're well down the path, but there's still quite a big chunk to go. And I suppose, Alex, given that you're joining us and that we're looking ahead also to what might happen at the end of this month, because lots of people have started talking about the 23rd of May and European elections. I'm just wondering what your perspective is as you look at these results, which you weren't taking part in, obviously. But what are you thinking now in terms of your own potential?
Well, I think that when you look at the commentary out there, people are saying that it could be that the Brexit Party will end up being the big winners from this, despite not fielding any candidates. And what's interesting, actually, about the results that we're seeing is there isn't actually a vehicle for a Brexit protest vote in these elections, other than UKIP. I know they fielded in about a quarter of constituencies, but they're rather imploding in on themselves. But really, for those people who are, you know, adamant that we need to leave the EU properly, there isn't anybody out there in these elections to actually give their vote to. So we're seeing this huge peak in the number of independents, success there. and smaller parties actually getting the fallout from the establishment parties imploding. But really, this isn't the forum to have a protest vote about Brexit. That is going to be coming up in 3 weeks' time in the European elections. And what's so tragic, in fact, is hardworking councillors in both of these gentlemen's parties are losing their jobs. You know, they've been working hard for their communities, and they're losing their jobs because of the arrogance and the venality of the national parties in Westminster.
Gosh, that's quite a big statement. What do you mean by venality?
Well, you know, I think the general public are completely, at the moment, disconnected with politics. I think what we're looking at constantly and what we're hearing in the media is a self-preservation exercise of the main parties. How do we get seats? How do we retain votes? How do we dupe people into continuing to back us? Not actually doing the real job of representing the people and delivering on a democratic vote. And I think people just feel like, well, why should I bother? You know, they feel disenfranchised because they feel unrepresented. And
Alex, which people, the 52% or the 48%? Because, you know, you would say, well, you want to deliver on the referendum result, quite understandably.
Well, okay,
and that's democratic.
Indeed, but who do you represent as Labour?
Well,
which side?
Exactly. What, you know, on the one hand, we have parties that are saying, I'm only for Remain. Other hand, you've got parties that are saying, I'm only for Leave. And what the Labour Party is trying to do is say, no, actually, we're for the population going forward together in a way that means that we can actually live with each other without fighting all the time.
That's all very well, and I think actually in many respects what's created this whole mess in the first place is Theresa May's strategy from the beginning was trying to build a compromise cabinet. You know, if England was playing the Czech Republic in a football match, you wouldn't have half your team Czech footballers. And I think from the beginning, rather than just delivering on the result of the referendum, we've had that debate. There was a majority. We were told it was a once-in-a-lifetime vote. The result was clear. And it's all very well saying, yes, we must bring the country together. But the more that you keep trying to give bits and bobs to one side or the other and trying to please both, it's not actually delivering on the democratic mandate. And B, a compromise is never going to suit anyone. This is just prevaricating.
What that doesn't take account of is that the referendum, as the Supreme Court said, decided that we should leave the European Union. It then went on to say, the Supreme Court said, that actually it's for Parliament to decide how we leave. And that's been the difficulty. Because
but that wasn't the place before the referendum happened. The problem is the referendum campaign said we'll be leaving the EU and its institutions. Everybody on both sides of the campaign said we'll be leaving the single market. We'll be leaving the customs union. They did. It's there on air. It's repeated in the annals of history.
A lot of things were said, but amongst them was, look at Norway. They're outside of the EU, and yet they're okay. Look at Turkey. It's got a customs union arrangement with the EU. You know, it's perfectly possible to be outside of the EU and still have a customs union. It's perfectly possible
to be outside of the EU. But also, you're looking at countries that didn't join in the first place. So perhaps, therefore, the logical sense would be to leave completely. Leave the institutions, leave the agencies, and from a position of independence, renegotiate an agreement, renegotiate a relationship with the EU where we can collaborate, we can be allies.
Your view of it. I understand that. I understand that's your view of it. But the point is, our fellow citizens are almost equally split on this. And unless we as politicians try and act responsibly and graciously to say to people, look, we're not going to be able to please the extremists on either side, but we can try.
I don't think you should say extremists. I think that's unhelpful language for people who either voted Leave or Remain.
I accept that. What I should say, the people who only want to remain and those people who only want to leave on a no deal. But what we need to do is to try and bring the 80% of the people together in a compromise that they can all say, you know what, it may not be exactly what
Alex,
I thought.
I'm going to bring in Alok now,
yes. But I can live with it.
Thank you, Alok.
So I think the first thing I would say to you is that I'm, of course, very sorry that we've lost some really good, hard-working councillors across the country. I'm incredibly disappointed for them, and I can understand why they're incredibly frustrated as well. There is no doubt that Brexit has loomed large over these elections. There's absolutely no doubt about that. That has had a huge impact in terms of the results. It is the case that these elections are being held in a cycle where last time around they were held was 2015. It was a high point for us. We won a general election with a majority, and so it's not surprising that in that context we are seeing losses. And in fact, you know, some of the projections that we had out there were sort of 1,000 plus we'll see where we end up. Of course, I'm disappointed. What I would just say in terms of Brexit, I think the message for the two main parties is we have to work together, there has to be compromise, and we have to come forward with a deal that is going to get through Parliament. And I would just say to Alex that, I don't think it's about people being venal, it's about people trying to do the right thing across Parliament. If I may, trying to do the right thing across Parliament. We also have to accept that we have no overall majority as a government in Parliament, so we have to work together. And that's what the two main parties are doing. And what I would like is, if we possibly can, to reach a compromise over the next couple of weeks so that we don't have to have these European elections.
We'll pick that up in a second. What I'd like to do is ask Rita for some of the latest results for us, Rita, because they're still coming in.
There are two specifically that I want to show you. They are both in the same county, but they are starkly different. These two councils are both a straightforward Labour Conservative contest. First of all, let me show you High Peak. In Derbyshire, as I said. This is a Labour gain from the Conservatives. They've gained it by a very slender majority, a majority of 1. But as we've discovered, what's so interesting in councils like this is the seat change. Look at that. The Conservatives down by 7 seats, Independent down by 1, and those seats have been divided up between Labour, the Liberal Democrats and the Greens. So hold that in your heads while you look at this, North East Derbyshire, where there is the opposite story going on. This is a Conservative gain from Labour, and they have a majority of 7. Now, this council has been Labour since the 1970s, and let's have a look at the seat change here. Look at that. Labour losing 17 seats, the Conservatives gaining 13, the Liberal Democrats 3 and the Independents 1. So what we might be seeing here is what Professor Sir John Curtice has been talking about, which is while this has been a disappointing night to different degrees for both the Conservatives and Labour, it feels as if voters are punishing the incumbent party. So Conservatives in High Peak, that's gone to Labour, and the reverse story in North East Derbyshire.
Rita, thanks very much for the latest results there. I'd like to go to Leeds because the Labour MP, senior Labour MP, Hilary Benn, is waiting to talk to us there, the chair of the Brexit Select Committee. Mr Benn, thanks very much for joining us. OK, what's your reading? What's your reading then, Hilary, of these results?
Look, I think it's a mixed picture, as John Curtice has been saying. When he's appeared on your programme, I'm pleased, obviously pleased about the result we've just heard in High Peak, the fact we gained Calderdale, Amber Valley and Trafford, which is a big prize, but we've lost control of other councils. And I'm sorry for the Labour councillors who've lost their seats. I think it's just over 80 at the moment. But the Tory losses are running at about 900, and we've seen gains for the Lib Dems, the Greens. So it's a mixed picture, but one issue I think dominates, apart from local factors, and one always has to take into account local factors in local elections. But there's no doubt that Brexit hangs like a spectre over British politics at the moment, and that includes the results that we've seen emerging since the early hours of the morning. And I think the message is people want this resolved, but as Barry Gardiner was just saying, the nation is split down the middle, and we have to find a way through this. And bluntly, Hugh, there's only 2 ways it can happen. Either Parliament agrees a deal, the Prime Minister's tried 3 times and been rejected 3 times, or we go back to the British people and say, well, this is the deal that has been negotiated. That's what the confirmatory referendum proposal that Phil Wilson and Peter Kyle put forward a couple of months ago, and say, you make the decision, because the great virtue of going back to the British people is you will get a final decision, and then we can get on with addressing all of the other questions, including those that affect local government and councillors who work very hard up and down the country, because we can't carry on like this politically, and we can't carry on like this economically, because it is doing damage to our economic future.
But would it be a final decision? This goes to the core of the thing, doesn't it, really, where people are simply refusing, as other people see it, to accept a democratic verdict. So when you say there'd be a final decision, if that didn't suit some people, they would question that decision. And then you're in this vicious circle. It never ends.
Well, decisions will always be contested. That's true for local elections. It's true for general elections. As soon as a general election is over, the parties that didn't do so well are hoping they're going to do better next time and urge people to kick out the government of the day and replace it with another one. I think in the case of a confirmatory referendum, which I have come to belatedly and in some respects reluctantly, because I thought we had an obligation to try and give effect to the referendum result, the problem has been that what was offered by the Leave campaign, you can keep all of the economic benefits and you can have all of your sovereignty, was never ever deliverable. It was never ever true. And so the deal that the Prime Minister's done, which is full of vagueness about our future relationship, does throw into sharp relief the fact that there are choices to be made and compromises that we have to settle on. And I think the Leavers are angry about that because in effect it exposes that they never had a plan and what they put forward, you can have your cake and eat it, wasn't true. But we have to make a choice. And the confirmatory referendum, I could see Parliament saying, if we got to that position, look, we allow the Prime Minister's deal to go through. We have legislation ready to say that if that's what the British people vote for in the confirmatory referendum, then that will immediately be enacted. In other words, there's not going to be a third go. And I would see that as the first option, because that's what Leave looks like. There is no other Leave deal. And for those who argue for a no-deal Brexit, remember, Huw, the Leave campaign never, ever, ever argued for a no-deal Brexit during the referendum, and therefore a no-deal Brexit would not respect the outcome of the referendum. And if the British people have changed their mind, we would remain. And if they haven't, we would leave on the basis of the Prime Minister's deal. And a confirmatory referendum is not saying to people, you have to change your mind from last time. It's saying to the British people, this is difficult, it's tricky, Parliament is stuck. And many people would wish Parliament wasn't stuck, but it's a fact. And we have to have a resolution. And that's why I've come to the conclusion that that is the way to do it. And I noticed with interest, Eric Pickles was reported as saying earlier that if Parliament can't resolve this, then maybe a confirmatory referendum is the only way out. And the Chancellor, of course, has described it as a credible proposition, which it certainly is.
Hilary Benn, good to talk to you again. Thank you very much for joining us. Hilary Benn, the Labour MP, with his view on what's been going on, talking to us from Leeds. In Mansfield, I talked to you about Mansfield earlier, the mayoral contest there. Well, what's happened there is that the Labour candidate, Andy Abrahams, has actually won, but look at the result. It went to a second recount, if we go through the first preferences there, and it went to a second recount and was won by 2 votes, just 2 votes in the second round. So the incumbent, the independent Kate Allsop in Mansfield, the Mansfield Independent Group, she has been beaten by 2 votes by Labour's Andy Abrahams. So that's a pretty dramatic outcome, isn't it? There are 11 local authority contests in Northern Ireland. Let's go to Belfast and talk to Emma Vardy and ask Emma, what does it look like there, Emma, not least in the context of Brexit and the role of the DUP, for example, with the Conservative government. So what does it look like?
Well, you always have to remember, of course, Huw, that Northern Ireland politics is defined by that big divide between unionist and nationalist parties, with the biggest parties being designated as one or the other. And when it comes to looking for any sort of Brexit effect, will voters punish the big parties at the ballot box? Well, there's a real dampening effect on that here, because the enduring pattern in Northern Ireland really is that, external, bigger picture factors, if you like, don't always seem to have an effect when it comes to the ballot box. That's because there is this reluctance, if you like, within communities to shy away or to change their voting pattern from the traditional nationalist and unionist parties. So what we've seen is the 2 largest, Sinn Féin and the DUP, taking seats in their strongholds, their vote holding up, if you like. The other factor here is, of course, the voting results actually mask the kind of frustration that is felt on the streets over the fact that Stormont hasn't been running here, no devolved government, for over 2 years. That's what you'll get when you talk to people, but they still go out and vote for the 2 biggest parties at the ballot box, and those results are showing that today. But away from Sinn Féin and the DUP, a few other notable results. A centrist party here, Alliance, with some younger candidates, a party that's neither designated unionist or nationalist. They've picked up 3 particularly notable seats here in Belfast. Some big cheers for them earlier with their younger candidates. And also huge cheers going up for a Green Party candidate, also picking up a seat in the Botanic area of Belfast, a younger cosmopolitan metropolitan area of the city, a candidate who's done a lot of groundwork over the last few months and is seeing the results of that today. Now, there were also a lot of people watching to see how the DUP's first openly gay candidate polled today. Of course, notable because the DUP is traditionally seen as very socially conservative on LGBT issues, a party that's opposed gay marriage in the past. But Alison Bennington, their first openly gay candidate, polled very well, although just falling short of the numbers she needed to get elected. But counting continuing here. Full picture will not be known until Saturday.
Emma, thanks very much for the look at the landscape there in Northern Ireland, which is an important part of what we're doing. Vicky, just some thoughts just before we end this section on BBC One. Just some thoughts on where we are given the latest results that Rita gave us just now.
I think the interesting question about all of this, given that so many of the candidates who have lost their seats have said that Brexit has been an issue in all of this, is that what impact that may or may not have on the talks that have been going on in Westminster, although not totally successfully so far. I mean, we have sat here many times, I've interviewed, as you have, many people from all the parties saying we need to compromise, we need to find a way through, we've got to get this sorted. How serious are the parties about that? And will the fact that it looks as if Labour might be being punished too for the impasse, will that mean that there could be some kind of compromise? Because you can see for both parties how it could be rather attractive proposition before those European elections to come up with some kind of deal that could get through Parliament so they can say that they have delivered. Because it does sound from people who've been knocking on the doors for weeks that Brexit is proving to be an issue which has driven a lot of these results.
Vicky, you're staying with us, and Rita is staying with us as well, of course, with the big touch screen to take us through some results, and our friends here on the panel are staying with us because we're not letting them go anywhere. And we're going to have a look at the scoreboard just at the end of this part of the programme, just to let you know where we are with the results still coming in. The Tories at the moment heading for 1,000 losses. Look at that, they're on 957 losses as we speak. Labour on 110 losses. The Lib Dems, their best recovery in a local election ever, 543 gains, and the Greens making very big gains as well. We'll be back on the news channel in about 10 minutes, but for now, goodbye.
Hello, here is a summary of the BBC News. The Conservative and Labour parties have suffered a backlash in the local elections, with voters apparently punishing them for the Brexit deadlock. Both have been seeing significant losses, and the main winners are smaller parties like the Liberal Democrats and the Greens, as well as independent candidates. The Prime Minister says voters are showing what they want politicians to do, which is to get on and deliver Brexit. Here's our political correspondent, Nick Hurdley.
Glum faces all round. This has not been a good result for the two biggest parties. Counting continues, but the Tories have lost more than 900 councillors so far, giving up control in St Albans, Southend, Peterborough and elsewhere. As the Prime Minister turned up to address members in Wales, some were less than impressed.
Thank you, everybody. And
why don't you resign?
With Tory losses mounting up, Mrs May had this assessment.
I think there was a simple message from yesterday's elections to both us and the Labour Party. Just get on and deliver Brexit.
But some think the PM herself is part of the problem.
Many of my constituents have said this to me, we need change, we need a change of leadership.
Tradition dictates the day after elections, party leaders head to where they won. Here's Jeremy Corbyn in Trafford and Greater Manchester. But his party lost control in Hartlepool, the Wirral and Bolsover. As things stand, Labour is facing a net loss and calls for a clearer policy on Brexit.
I think it means there's a huge impetus on every MP, and they've all got that message, whether they themselves are leave or remain, or the people across the country, that an arrangement has to be made, a deal has to be done, and Parliament has to resolve this issue.
But others think the result shows the need for Labour to back another referendum.
My prediction is that we are going to need to go back to the people and we're going to need to say to them, did you vote for this?
On the basis of detailed voting figures in some wards, if the results are replicated across the UK, the Conservatives and Labour would be tied on 28%. The Lib Dems would be on 19, others would be on 25. That'll be music to the ears of Liberals. More than 500 councillors up so far, taking control of councils in Bath, Winchester and the Cotswolds.
Well, just celebrating a really great result here. Chelmsford, Essex, but this story across the country. You know, the Lib Dems were written off at one point, but we're coming back very, very strongly. We're the big winners of the night.
Independents have done well so far, as has the Green Party.
We've broken through on 16 new councils, really cementing our place as the fourth party in England in local government, and a real momentum, I think, going into the European elections. Of course, we're the biggest representation of any Remain party in the European Parliament at the moment.
Despite anger over Brexit, it's been tough so far for UKIP. They've gone backwards.
Yes, we've lost some seats, but also we've made some gains in Sunderland. We've made a few gains there, and actually when you look at the results of areas like Sunderland, where we didn't win, we got a lot of second places, so they're good and bad across the board.
There are plenty more results to come, including in Northern Ireland, where counting began this morning. Across the UK, parties are watching closely, trying to figure out what it might mean for their wider fortunes. For Labour and the Tories, commiserations to share, problems to solve. Nick Eddy, BBC News.
Blackadder star Sir Tony Robinson has announced that he's quitting the Labour Party after 45 years as a member. In a tweet, Sir Tony said he'd made the decision partly because of what he called the Labour Party's continued duplicity on Brexit and partly because of anti-Semitism. He further criticised the leadership. Counting is underway in Northern Ireland as well, of course. A total of 462 seats are up for grabs across 11 councils there. The first few results have started to trickle in, but most are expected later today or tomorrow morning, and there are no elections in Scotland or in Wales. A devastating cyclone has hit the east coast of India. More than 1 million people are sheltering in relief centres amid 120-mile-an-hour winds, which have uprooted trees and brought down electricity and phone lines. Cyclone Fani is the most powerful to hit India for years. Rahul Tandon reports.
This is the fury of nature in one of India's poorest states. The cyclone hit this area at around 8 a.m. local time, and over the last hour, we've seen the wind speeds increase dramatically. In Puri, where the cyclone came in, speeds are up to 210 kilometers an hour. On Thursday, one of the largest evacuations that this area has ever seen took place. The authorities used tractors, boats, cars, any form of transport they could find to get people into safety, into those temporary shelters. The first part of that work has been done, but when this cyclone passes by, many people will have seen their lives destroyed. Their land will have been destroyed by the cyclone, and the boats they go fishing on will also be devastated. A huge operation taking place. Now the government asking people to stay indoors. Many people in those shelters, though, will be worried. What will they go back to when this cyclone moves on?
New research has found that people receiving effective treatment for HIV cannot pass on the virus to their sexual partners. A study published in the Lancet Medical Journal looked at nearly 1,000 gay male couples and discovered no cases of HIV transmission over 8 years. The researchers say it is a powerful message which everyone should be aware of. Prince Harry has cancelled part of his planned trip to the Netherlands next week. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex are currently expecting their first child. Prince Harry's cancelled his trip to Amsterdam on Wednesday, but his trip to The Hague on Thursday for the 2020 Invictus Games is still planned to take place. Thousands of Celtic fans have gathered at the club's stadium in Glasgow to pay their final respects to Billy McNeill. The former Celtic captain and manager, who was the first British man to lift the European Cup, died last week aged 79. Football stars including Sir Alex Ferguson and Sir Kenny Dalglish attended his funeral in Glasgow today. Now let's get all of the sport full roundup from the Sports Centre, and here this afternoon is Huw.
Hello, good afternoon to you, Carrie. Yes, lots to talk about. And first, England's bowlers have been trying to both help win a game and a place in the squad for the Cricket World Cup later this year. Jofra Archer has been making his debut and he's taken his first international wicket as well. He bowled Ireland batsman Mark Adair with a 90-mile-per-hour Yorker in the one-day match at Malahide that's been reduced to 45 overs a side because of a damp outfield there this morning. But the bowlers who could be most threatened by Archer's arrival after residency rules were changed have also been among the wickets. Liam Plunkett and Tom Curran helping bowl Ireland out for 198. England have started their reply. They are 6 without loss. Liverpool's Naby Keita will be out for at least 2 months with a thigh injury suffered in the Champions League defeat at Barcelona this week. He'll miss the rest of the season in the Premier League and is doubtful for the Africa Cup of Nations for his country, Guinea, as well. It starts on June the 21st in Egypt. Liverpool without Keita will travel to Newcastle tomorrow in their penultimate Premier League game. David De Gea will keep his place in goal for Manchester United's match against Huddersfield. That's on Sunday, despite a series of mistakes in recent games. Manager Ole Gunnar Solskjaer might have been considering promoting United's reserve keeper Sergio Romero, but he's injured anyway.
He's been in the headlines maybe for the wrong reasons, but that's just, as I've said so many times, he's got to deal with that. The goalkeeping department, they're a fantastic group together with Emilio and Sergio and Lee and David. They've been such a tight-knitted group. They've experienced better times, obviously, than just now. But he's ready for Sunday.
The postponed championship match between Bolton and Brentford will not take place, giving Brentford a 1-0 win and 3 points. It was originally delayed after the Bolton team refused to play over unpaid wages. Meanwhile, the EFL says that they are aware of Lawrence Bassini's claims that he is in control of Bolton, despite the club saying his takeover was off. Bassini made the comments to various news outlets today. However, the club is yet to comment. The EFL says they remain in contact with representatives from both parties. Caster Semenya is set to run in the 800 metres in the Diamond League meeting and in Doha at around 6:05 this evening, our time. It'll be just 48 hours since the Court of Arbitration for Sport dismissed her challenge against the IAAF's new rules, which restrict testosterone levels in female runners. There is speculation it could be Semenya's last race as a professional after she posted that knowing when to walk away is wisdom. Yana Konta has reached the first clay court final of her career at the Morocco Open in Rabat. The British #1 had never even made the last 4 on this surface before, but beat the Australian 4th seed Ayla Tomljanovic in straight sets. Konta hasn't won a tournament for 2 years now and has dropped to 47 in the world. David Gilbert has a 10 frames to 6 lead over John Higgins in their semi-final of the World Snooker Championship at the Crucible. That match resumes at 7 this evening, with 16 the target for the players. This afternoon, the other semi-final between Gary Wilson and Judd Trump is continuing. These are live pictures from Sheffield. They've just returned after the mid-session interval. Judd Trump won the first frame thereafter, and it is 7-6 to Trump, currently the favourite for the title this year. Britain's Lizzie Deignan finished in the pack in the opening stage of the Women's Tour de Yorkshire. The former world champion was racing in Britain for the first time since the birth of her daughter in September. No one came close, though, to the Dutch rider Lorena Wiebes, who stormed clear of the rest in the Finnish sprint in Bedale. Meanwhile, you can keep track of the men's race in the Tour de Yorkshire and follow all the rest of our stories via the BBC Sport website and app. So head there now, but that is all the sport for right now. Much more coming up in the next hour.
Thank you, Huw. And that is it from us. Now back to election 2019.
Yes, indeed. Welcome back to the BBC's Election Centre. And we are approaching the end of this electoral race because so far we have 208 councils declared with 40 to go. And we have more than 6,500 councillors elected with around 1,700 to go. So very much in the final stretch. The Conservatives now are within 10 losses of 1,000. So I think, you know, if this pattern continues, they will have lost more than 1,000 councillors in this contest, which I have to say, given what people were saying to us before today and yesterday, is very much at the upper end, if not beyond the upper end of the losses they were expecting. Labour have also made losses, but of losses of 108. But of course, there are big questions there around that performance and whether it's the performance of a party that is in the kind of condition that it should be in if it is to challenge at a general election. I'm sure Barry Gardiner will have a view on that. The Lib Dems, well, it's been a great performance for them, having gained 555 so far. Vicky's with me again, and we'll have a word with Rita as well with some of the results, and I'll reintroduce my panel. But Vicky, so far, the Tories are heading for 1,000+ losses. Now, even yesterday when we spoke to James Cleverly, who was sitting in this seat where Alok is now, last night, and was saying, well, 800 to 1,000 would be very bad. I'm paraphrasing. So we're heading there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty appalling set of results for the Conservatives. And I think the worry for them is that it will be seen as a judgment on their competence. Now, whether that's competence on delivering Brexit or something else, or is it a judgment on leadership? And neither of those have come out as a positive here. And we know there is this problem, of course, with Brexit. They have failed to come up with something that can be delivered. And their councillors who have lost councils, who have lost their seats, are blaming Brexit, but they're also blaming Theresa May. There has been some chat around leadership. We saw her being heckled from someone in the audience at the Welsh Conservative Party Spring Conference, and those questions are being raised by some MPs as well about actually does she need to give a much tighter timetable on when exactly she were to stand down. But it doesn't get away from the fact that this Brexit issue has to be sorted out in some way, and all the politicians keep saying it's got to be sorted out. The question is, how will it be sorted out? So there are those talks going on in Westminster at a stalemate. Could it be the fact that Labour seem to be being punished too? Now, looking at those numbers, anyone watching that will say, well, look, it's not been that bad for Labour. They're standing still, virtually going back a bit. But you've got to be clear about where the parties are coming from. The Conservatives, 4 years ago, when this same lot of elections happened, had a really good night. They did very, very well. Labour already weren't doing very well. So to go backwards from a position that was pretty weak in the first place is really, I would say, quite worrying for the Labour Party. I think they will look at this and be surprised that it's been as bad for them. If they are talking about wanting a general election, that's been the main thrust of their Brexit policy, actually, is to say we want to push for a general election. Now, on these kind of figures, they would get nowhere near being able to form a government. They were a long way behind at the last general election. Even though their share of the vote was pretty good, they need to win 60 seats from somewhere. And it's hard to see. Now, there are some pockets where they have done OK and they might win a marginal seat with the Conservatives, but it wouldn't be anywhere near enough. And then the clear winners of the evening are the Liberal Democrats. There's no question about that. But again, coming from a pretty appalling position. They have been wiped out virtually in the southwest of England in terms of their councillors. So this shows them building up that base again. We know that's how they operate. They build up councillors, they run councils, and then they can sometimes then win the parliamentary seat. But the big question for them, of course, under a new leader probably in the next few months, can they translate that local party campaigning, the pavement politics they're famous for, can they translate that into parliamentary seats? They would say that these results are showing not that people want Brexit delivered, because the winners, them and the Greens, are parties that have had, out of all the parties, a much clearer message about actually wanting to stop Brexit happen at all. And that's going to confuse the picture in Parliament.
Let's talk about performance, and we're talking there about relative performance, and start with the Conservatives and go to Rita, who's got some figures for us.
I wanted to delve in a little bit deeper to some of these Conservative results. We've brought you lots of screens of Conservative councils that have gone into no overall control or that have been taken from the Conservatives by the Liberal Democrats. Well, I've got 3 councils here that have been held by the Conservatives. They were Conservative before, Conservatives have held them. Wokingham in Berkshire, West Oxfordshire and Tunbridge Wells in Kent. And as you can see, the Conservatives, by far and away, the highest number of seats in each of those councils. But let's take a slightly closer look at what's happened at this election. So this shows you the seat change as compared to the last time these councils were up for election, which was in 2015. And look at how many seats the Conservatives have lost. 10 in Wokingham, 7 in West Oxfordshire, 13 in Tunbridge Wells. If we keep going on to the next page, this shows you the share of the vote. In Wokingham, the Conservatives were actually beaten by the Liberal Democrats in terms of the share of the vote. Different picture in West Oxfordshire, but in Tunbridge Wells, they're practically level pegging with the Liberal Democrats. And this shows you the share change compared with the last time these seats were up for election 4 years ago. And that is very stark, isn't it? Look at that figure in Tunbridge Wells for the Conservatives, minus 23%. This is true blue territory we're talking about. And it gives a very different gloss in a way to the headline, which is that the Conservatives have retained these councils. And this is the final screen showing you the swing from Conservative to Liberal Democrat, 15%, 14%, 18%. So a lot of churn going on, even in these councils where the Conservatives have held on.
Rita, thanks very much. And if you're just joining us, let me reintroduce my three guests in the studio who've kindly joined us this afternoon. We have Alex Phillips from the New Brexit Party. We have Barry Gardiner, who is Labour's Shadow Trade Secretary. And we have the Employment Minister, the Conservative, Alok Sharma. Thank you all for coming in. And as we head towards the finishing line, Alok, do you question Vicky's analysis there about what's gone wrong for you in these elections?
Well, I think Vicky's right, and a lot of people have said this, that actually it is, I think as Hilary Benn said, the spectre of Brexit that has loomed over this. There was a discussion around, is this about wider competence? Actually, I don't think it is. I mean, if you put Brexit to one side, the economy in itself is performing pretty well. We have record levels of employment, more people in work than ever before, wages outpacing inflation for the 13th month in a row. We've given tax cuts to people through personal allowances going up. So I think there is a very clear distinction in these elections where people have focused on Brexit as an issue, and that has clearly impacted on us. Just one other point I would say is that, yes, it's not a good night for us. That is obvious. But I think it's interesting that the Labour position here, where yesterday John McDonnell was talking about gains of around 400, and at this point in the electoral cycle, if Labour were having any hope of forming a government, so if you look back to 2012, they had gains of 500 plus. They've gone backwards. They've absolutely gone backwards. And I think this is also a message to the Labour Party that there is a question mark over their competence as well, not just on Brexit, but more fundamentally about their leadership and their policies.
Well, Barry, you'll want to answer.
All I would say is call the general election now and we'll see. Yeah. But look, I actually want to focus on something that I don't...
I'm not sure you'd want a general election now, Barry. Look at the results.
I want to focus on something that, in fact, we haven't really delved into, and that's to go away from Brexit and look at these elections as local elections. And I wanted to pick up on one of the things that Rita said, not last time, but the time before, when she was speaking about punishing the incumbent. Because I think in the major cities and towns where Labour has been in control for a very long period in some cases, Sunderland and places like that, over the past 10 years, the council has had to implement 61% cuts, and that's come straight down from government. It's 80% of the 80% of local government spending that is provided by central government. And it's 61% cuts that have gone across the country. So in local service provision, people have said, why are there potholes in my road? Why is the rubbish not being collected properly? Why is there fly tipping? Why are children's services being cut? Why are my schools not getting enough funding? And they've then said, well, who's in charge at the local council? Well, in those big conurbations, it's been the Labour Party. And I actually think that people have not made the real connection and said, well, it's because the Conservatives have cut the money to local authorities, which means that our services now are so much poorer. And I think we've paid the price for being the incumbent in those areas. And that's why I think it's interesting when Rita was talking about, punishing the incumbent, that actually in the south, where we haven't had that same dominance in some of those towns and cities, it's been the incumbent again that's been punished because they've seen those local services depleted. And that's why I would very happily take up Alok's challenge about a general election, because I believe that by focusing on all the things that Labour has focused on in its manifesto in 2017 and still focusing on, you know, the recent announcement we made on bus services. These are the local issues. These are the things that people actually feel they impact on my life. And that's where I think we really will score. So I just wanted to focus back on the local and use that as another lens to view things from.
Barry, thank you. Well, there's a milestone we're past, isn't it? If you look at the figures, look at the Conservative tally, it has now passed the 1,000 mark, the 1,000 losses. Labour on -102 and the Lib Dems, as we say, on 559 gains, the Greens on 146 gains. But the Conservative figure, just I suppose as a psychological barrier, and it's still going up, look, it's still going up, 1,012 losses now, and it won't end either because there are 36 councils yet to come, so it'll be higher than that. There was talk there about incumbency and you know, how oppositions deal with that. Rita, do you want to take us through some of those thoughts and put it in some kind of context, maybe going back to the 90s?
Absolutely, Huw. I think it's useful to bear in mind that we have had a projected national share of the vote today of the Conservatives and Labour both being on 28%. So this is based on analysis that Professor Sir John Curtice has done of the results that suggests how the country would vote as a whole if everyone were voting today. Now, I want you to bear that in mind while we look at the opposition lead in mid-term in previous years. We started here in 1994, so this is all these dates are taken 2 years after a general election. And at this point, Labour's John Smith in 1994 had a lead in terms of over the government of 15%. In 1999, William Hague was trailing the government by 3%, but Ian Duncan Smith, a lead of 5%, David Cameron, a lead of 13%, and Ed Miliband, a lead of 7%. Now, look at those figures. Of those 5 leaders, only Tony Blair, who took over from John Smith after his death, went on to win a large majority. David Cameron, although he had a 13% lead then, he in fact failed to get a majority in 2010, although he did then go on and form a government, of course, in coalition with the Liberal Democrats. And I think it's worth bearing all of this in mind because Jeremy Corbyn's lead on the basis of the projected national share at the moment is precisely 0, and it does suggest that Labour has a great deal of work to do.
Indeed, Rita, thank you very much. And, you know, intriguing question for us at the close of play almost today is, what would that projected national share mean if it was translated into House of Commons seats? This is just an exercise which will illustrate that, and we'll bring John Curtice in, who's responsible for the projection. And that's it for you. Look, Conservatives on 269, down 49. Labour on 280, plus 18. The Lib Dems on 29 plus 17. This is all based on that national share projection that we were talking about earlier, and the others up 14 on 72. So while we keep those figures up there, let's bring John back in and just talk us around these figures, John.
Well, of course, this is the moment after a long night and a long day, Huw, when, as Peter Snow, our former esteemed colleague, would say, here is a bit of fun. And so I think the truth is, you know, this should not be taken too seriously, but there is a serious point behind it. So what we've done here, we've taken the projected national share, we've taken into account the fact that there tends to be a systematic difference between how parties do in local elections and how they do in general elections, particularly that the Liberal Democrats always do better in local elections. We've taken account of that and said, after bearing that in mind, what might happen? Well, crucial point number one, and this is why the idea that perhaps an early general election might get us out of the Brexit impasse, on the evidence of what we've seen today, I wouldn't count on it, because we would have a parliament that was even more hung than the current one. But also note, and this isn't something that will be clear from your screen, if we assume that the SNP basically retain their share of the vote north of the border, which is what the polls are saying they're doing, we'd probably end up with 50 SNP MPs, which means that in this scenario, the only way of forming a government would be by the Labour Party coming to an accommodation of some kind with the SNP, the price of which, of course, might be one or other of two things. One is a second EU referendum. The other is another referendum on Scottish independence. So, be careful what you wish for when you go for a general election. Now, of course, one other important caveat: no Brexit party, no Change UK, and insofar as they weren't standing, this is perhaps not necessarily representative of what would happen, but having more parties fighting election is hardly likely to make it less likely that we would end up with a hung parliament.
Well, that's a fascinating prospect, John, isn't it? And I'm just wondering again if you could recap for those viewers who are joining us. When we talk about 28% apiece on that projected national share, what exactly that looks like in the context, let's say, of the last 30 years?
Well, the honest truth is there's only once before have we had a set of local elections where we've done this calculation and ended up saying that both the Conservatives and the Labour Party were below 30%. That occasion was 2013, when UKIP surprised everybody and suddenly became serious electoral players in that year's local elections, caught everybody napping, and both Conservatives and the Labour Party suffered. And of course, that was the beginning of a story that eventually led to the referendum and the Brexit impasse that we've all been talking about and wondering about what the consequences have been for the last 12 hours. But certainly I think what one has to say, crucial feature of the 2017 general election, apparently the restoration of the traditional two-party system, Conservative and Labour combined, winning over 80% of the vote for the first time since the 1970s. Well, 2 years hence, the two-party system in these elections at least has never looked any weaker. And who knows what's going to come on May the 23rd.
Who knows indeed, John. And it's my turn now to say a very big thank you for your contribution overnight and during the day. It's been a delight as always. So thank you very much for being with us.
Welcome.
And I'm sure we'll see you on other outlets very shortly. Yes, yes.
I think the politicians are going to ensure that happens here. But anyway,
John, thank you very much. So, Alex, you are going to be leaving us soon, sadly, as well. I'm just let's leave a thought. What is your thought that you want to leave with viewers after, an election in which you didn't take part, but clearly you are looking forward to a contest in which you will play a prominent part?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said earlier, these elections haven't actually had a vehicle for the Brexit protest vote. There hasn't really been a party there that says, if you're dissatisfied with the handling of Brexit...
Yes?
Well, yes, but they have sort of imploded and moved, really over the last 6 months. They haven't really been talking about Brexit, but talking about sort of socially conservative issues and completely different topics. And I think what we're going to see in the European elections is a massive breakthrough for the Brexit Party. Yes, of course, proportional representation favours entryists. And the problem with the two-party system we have in first past the post is this stagnancy and these tribal politics. Looking earlier at the results and the swing in different places, what you see is the Lib Dems picking up votes because you don't often have people going from Tories to Labour, Labour to Tories, and you constantly end up in this struggle where power's swapped between one and the other. I think it leads to political complacency. We're entering a new era of politics, multi-party politics, not three-party politics, as Vince Cable said earlier. And yeah, I think, we are long overdue a big change in politics, and the Brexit Party are going to represent a change for good.
Are you terrified, Barry and Alan, with that?
No.
I mean,
trepidation.
Seriously, is it? Well, all right. Let's reword it and make it slightly less sort of overstated. Are you not concerned about it?
I don't think we should be concerned about our electors having a choice.
Right.
I think we should set out our stall to them. And yes, of course, in politics, people have different views. But if you're confident that your manifesto is meeting the aspirations and actually solving the problems that people have, then you should be proud to put that to them and confident that you could come out the other end.
Because for you, Alok, when you think about a party led by Nigel Farage, with the fact that so many of your constituency workers, because they talk to us, have enormous sympathy for the kinds of things that he's been saying, you must have some concerns about what those European elections could bring for you in terms of results.
Well, I think Barry talked about the manifesto, and what is clear is both in our manifesto and the Labour manifesto, we said we would deliver on the Brexit referendum result. We have not been able to do that by the date that we said. And I think that's the outcome that we're seeing overnight and today. And so what is incumbent on us is to make sure that we work collectively in Parliament to get this over the line. And I think what you've seen today is very much a big protest from people who, on all sides have said, we've had enough, we want you to get this done, and they want to move on and discuss all the other issues that are important to us in our lives.
But that protest could persist, couldn't it, on the 23rd of May, very much to your cost?
Well, it may, if we haven't got this sorted out. That's why I think it's really important that over the next few weeks we work incredibly hard and diligently so that we can get this through.
Realistic?
Well, I'm not involved in the discussions that are taking place. I don't know precisely what stage they're at. I know that they're being conducted in good faith. We just need to make sure that we resolve this. I agree with you that, getting to the European elections will be challenging.
If I may, actually, I think one of the issues that we're seeing at the moment is both establishment parties have their fingers in their ears and are singing their own tune. The EU have said, this isn't Theresa May's deal, actually. This is the EU's deal. They have said this is the only deal in town. No cherry picking, no ifs, no buts. We're not going to reopen it. It's this or nothing. And what's happened is Parliament's taken no deal off the table. So if they're not going to vote through the EU's deal, and they can have these discussions, they can try and reach compromise, but then you have to go through a whole load of ratification processes. The idea that you can do that before MEPs take their seats, to me, seems pie in the sky. I know you have to say that. I know that's the spin you have to give the general public. But,
I'm sorry, I disagree. I don't think it's a question of giving spin. I mean, it is possible to get legislation through very quickly in Parliament if there is a requirement and a desire to do that. I don't think that's the issue here. I think what's going to be quite important for us is to also recognise that the country is split. I campaigned for Remain, I voted for Remain, but I have accepted the result. It is also the case that 48% voted for Remain and 52% went to leave. And so we have to find a compromise that works for the country as a whole.
But that's not
and it needs to work in Parliament, Barry.
A final quick comment, Barry.
In that case, do you not regret, as I do, that it took beyond the date that we were supposed to have left the EU before the Prime Minister actually reached out across the divide and said to the Leader of the Opposition, right, I now am prepared to take your proposal seriously. For 18 months, we had been talking about a customs union. For 18 months, we'd been talking about protecting workers' rights and environmental standards. And you had told us it was pie in the sky, you had told us it couldn't be achieved, it was unicorns and it was impossible. And then, because you couldn't get your proposals through the House of Commons on the third time of asking, you had to come to us and say, OK, please, maybe you're right after all. And now we're in these negotiations, these protracted negotiations, and still, Theresa May is not prepared to move that red line of the customs union. There's ground that has been given, but she should have done it before, and she now must move a lot faster.
Hang on a second, sorry, Alex. Just a quick answer, because I need to move on.
Absolutely. I mean, the reality is that your viewers will be watching this, and they will be in a certain amount of dismay. What we need to do is not look back, but actually look forward, and over the next few weeks, try and find a solution that works.
Okay. Let's focus on some of the results that we're still interested in at this point, and because we'll see, we're saying goodbye to Alex, obviously. We'll see you later on. Thank you very much. Dudley in the West Midlands has remained a hung council. Very Brexit voting part of the UK, as we know, and our reporter Phil Mackey has been talking to voters there.
Well, it's been a busy day at Dudley Market. They're practically sold out and are packing up now. It was a very close, so close that the two main parties finished level pegging last night with 36 Conservatives and 36 Labour councillors, and it's probably likely that Conservatives will control the council using the mayor's casting vote for the next year. It's a key election battleground. Dudley North is held by Labour, Dudley South held by the Conservatives. I've got Rob here, one of the market traders who's had a good day. Rob, did you vote yesterday?
No, I didn't, no.
Why didn't you vote?
Well, I don't really vote in local elections anyway, but I ripped the ballot cards up because I was so disappointed with the politics the last 12 months.
Because?
Well, I actually voted to come out because of the law. I wanted our own justice in charge of our own courts.
So you voted leave on sovereignty politics?
Our own destiny.
And you're fed up now because?
Well, the MPs ain't delivered, have they? At the end of the day, they're paid to do a job. And it looks to me they don't want the job, or they want the job, but they don't want the responsibility for the job.
So even though it's a local election, it was the national issue that you chose
well,
not to vote.
I
You didn't vote on it, but you chose not to.
I just looked the cards would right up. I might be honest.
Okay, I'll let you pack
Okay.
up. Thanks very much, Rob. I've got two other Dudley voters here, Tony and Gary. Tony, first of all, you voted Labour last night. You voted Remain in the referendum, so you're probably unhappy with the election result here in Dudley because you would have liked Labour to take control of this PC.
I think unhappy is a bit of an understatement, really, after what the Conservatives have done to us over the last few years. We've been fighting for 18 months now and managed to get it delayed about a travellers transit site, which the Conservatives want to put in our area.
So for you, it was very much about a local issue, and for that reason, even though in the past you voted for other parties, Labour are the ones that you wanted to get in here.
In the past, I've always voted for who I think would do the best job. This time, I actually did vote for the party just to try to keep the Conservatives out.
Okay, and Gary here as well. Somebody you voted all your life, you didn't vote.
First time, over 20 years, never voted now.
Why not?
Disillusioned.
Disillusioned
Not
with all the
local,
parties?
With all the parties, not local issues, just disillusioned over Brexit mainly.
Because you voted Leave and...
I voted Leave, yeah, and I think it's a fiasco. We're not going to get it, basically. Scared out, cowards, basically. Scared to go on their own, you know what I mean? Let the people down.
So even though it's a local election, you registered your protest by not voting?
Protest about by not voting, yeah.
Okay, well thanks very much both of you. Sorry to keep you waiting in what is turning into a miserable grey afternoon here in Dudley. And it's been a funny picture in the West Midlands today. The Lib Dems have made gains in some of those seats like Warwick and Solihull where they used to do quite well, but not really any inroads anywhere else. The Greens have hold the balance of power in Worcester. They're doing pretty well in Solihull where they're the second party, but Labour have lost and gained, the Conservatives have lost and gained, and I'd say in these key Midlands election, West Midlands election battlegrounds, there's been no clear winner today.
That was Phil Mackey there. Gosh, there were some very strong and clear voices there in Dudley, weren't there? And if anybody's doubting whether Brexit was an issue for lots of people, well, there's the proof for you. Another rather dramatic result in from Surrey Heath. Now, this is basically Camberley in Surrey. This is Michael Gove's backyard, by the way. Look at this result. This is, you know, in the past, absolutely rock-solid Conservative territory. 18 needed for a majority. Tories on 18. Lib Dems on 10. Independents on 4. The Greens on 2. Labour on 1. The change is what we need to look at. Look what's happened. The Tories have lost 14 seats in Surrey Heath. The Lib Dems put 9 on and the Independents put 3 on. The Greens have also added 2. And that result means that the Tories have held on to it, but with a majority of 1 in a council where their hold in the past would simply not have been questioned for 1 second. So that tells you something about the state of play after this election. We are estimating, you know, it's a big estimate, given that the Tories are running at the moment at losses of 1,065, as you can see there from the tally, that their losses could reach possibly 1,300. I said could reach 1,300 at this rate of loss. It may be less than that, but that gives you a sense of the order of loss that they are facing, which is clearly much more significant than anyone had been predicting yesterday. They're still counting, I think, in Thanet in Kent, which was the UKIP stronghold last time round. Ellie is there for us, Ellie Price. Ellie, what's the latest in Thanet?
Yeah, they are still counting, Hugh. The rumours that we needed to be done by 5 because there's bingo here in this hall tonight have proved to be unfounded, but yeah, most of them have come in now. Very interesting, as you say, this was a UKIP stronghold back when these elections were last held in 2015. It became the first council in the country that UKIP took control of. Fast forward a few years, a number of defections over local issue of Manson Airport and the future of Manson Airport, and suddenly UKIP, it would seem, are a spent force and have only fielded 3 candidates in this set of elections, and it would seem so far that none of them have held on to any of those seats. So the big question was always going to be what would happen to those votes. It would seem to be a good day for Labour, improving on their expectations for the day. So far, they seem to have picked up an extra 12 council seats. They had 5 before. They seem to be on 17 at the moment. The Conservatives on 18 as we speak, although I think one's just being announced now. They were on 22, so whether they've lost or not, we need to sort of work that one out. But the big question, as I say, was going to be, where do those UKIP voters go? It would seem that Labour have picked up a number of the seats that those UKIP candidates had the last time round, and also the Greens for the first time have been elected. 3 Greens have been elected on Thanet District Council. Apparently they've never been, Greens have never been elected onto the council before, as well as 1 independent and 4 Thanet independents. Now those are the candidates who used to be UKIP who are now standing as Thanet independents. But interesting picture, I think, here in Thanet, if we look at the possibility of a snap general election, because historically Thanet, South Thanet was very much a target seat for Labour, and certainly back in 2015 when Nigel Farage stood here, of course he didn't win, the Conservatives took the seat, but Labour very much also focused on what was a 3-way marginal. So no doubt there will be a bit of interest back here again here in Thanet, and Conservatives conceding very early on in the day that they were going to have a bad day. They also said to me, a couple of senior Conservatives said to me that they felt that it was lucky that UKIP were not fielding any candidates here, nor indeed that Nigel Farage's Brexit party had got their act together and fielded any council candidates in this election. And certainly they think it will be a very different picture come those European elections in a few weeks' time. The one senior Conservative said to me that they think they'll receive a walloping. In fact, there was even a suggestion that a number of the South Thanet members of the Conservative Party wouldn't be out campaigning and would indeed be supporting Nigel Farage's Brexit party.
Ellie, thank you very much for the update there. And we heard the voice in the background. I couldn't work out whether it was the returning officer or the bingo caller just warming up. But anyway, good to get the update there from Thanet and from Ellie, because clearly that is a significant contest as well. Can I say a warm welcome to Chuka Umuna from Change UK, who's just joined us, and Barry is still with us, and so is Alok. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Okay, so you weren't taking part in this. You will be in the Euros.
Yes.
They happen on the 23rd of May. We'll talk about that. So an outside take, if you like, on this set of results. What do you make of it?
Well, it's quite weird being back in this studio in a way, because the last time I was in a studio like this, doing a programme like this, was on the night of the EU referendum result, when David Dimbleby was sitting where you were and declared the result. But there is absolutely no doubt about this, that there is huge discontent with our broken political system. In Change UK, we share it. Of course, that's why we left the main established parties. But some of the things, I mean, look, I haven't been able to watch the whole of this show, but I'm sure you've probably talked about how where independents have been standing, on average, they've been getting 25% of the vote. We are seeing a huge number of spoiled papers, and that's before you consider that on John Curtis's projections, I think you're looking at a vote share for each of the main parties of below 30%.
2018.
So, you know, huge discontent with the system. We're glad that parties that unequivocally support having a people's vote and referring the issue of Brexit back to the British people, and who want to campaign to remain, have done well here. We recommended that supporters of ours vote for them at the local elections yesterday. But, you know, either you wake up and take stock of the fact that this is a broken political system and, you know, Brexit is exhibit A, or you just keep putting your head in the sand and deny it's a problem.
What's your answer then to somebody watching who'll say, well, given what the Lib Dems did yesterday and the Greens and some independents, what's the point of Change UK in that context? Because these parties are offering a choice and these parties are offering an avenue to people. So why would you come into existence?
Well, as I think you quoted Vince Cable saying earlier, I think we are seeing a big change historically in British politics. We, I think, are gradually moving from a two-party system to a multi-party system. And on each side of the Brexit argument, you have a range of choices. We have a particularly distinct offer. We are not just about Brexit, otherwise we would have called ourselves the Remain Party. You have people in Change UK who are drawn from progressive politics but come from 3 different political traditions. And we figure that if we are able to reach a consensus on policy positions on an evidence-based way forward for our country, then we've got a good chance of uniting the country, because we don't agree on everything and we haven't all come from the same political tradition. So there's quite a distinct offer there. There are others on the table. I think from a kind of European Union Brexit policy perspective, what people will obviously be looking at is what is the aggregate tally of votes on each side of the argument. If you're a Leave voter, you have the choice of UKIP, the Brexit Party and the Conservative Party. Some might say the Labour Party as well, who say they want to facilitate Brexit, or certainly I think Barry does, but or on the other side of the argument you have a range of different choices too, and that's as it should be. I don't think we can just...
I mean, the system for general elections,
yes,
the first past the post. I mean, the European elections is a bit easier because it's proportional, but much harder in a general election. You're going to have to be looking at doing deals, aren't you, with the Greens and the Lib Dems about where you all stand?
Well, look, we'll see where we are at a general election. I think backroom deals and stitch-ups is precisely one of the features that turns people off politics. I mean, the system for the election of MEPs is not by no means perfect. The Haunt system, I don't think is a very good system myself. But first past the post, look, if you don't like the place that we're at the moment, which is a rigged system which generally favours two main parties, then at the next general election, if you don't want any change, you just vote for one of those two options. And they're certainly never going to change the electoral system if they end up in office because it's against their interests. It's rigged in their favour. If you genuinely want to see change and you want a multi-party system, you're going to have to vote for something different. Now, our challenge at the time of the next general election is to put forward a compelling agenda which credibly can change the country and people want to vote for. We're 3 weeks old, so give us a bit of time. We've got a very clear position on Brexit. We are against Brexit, we want a people's vote, and we will campaign to remain in the European Union. But if we just slap down a manifesto...
Sounds like the Lib Dems, doesn't it?
Yeah, and you could say the Green Party and others. But like I said, those aren't the only things that you stand for as a party.
Are you standing in every constituency in the Euro elections?
Yes, we are. We've got 70 candidates.
So you have a full slate of candidates.
We've got a full slate of candidates, and it will be a new option on the paper for people to vote for.
And at a general election, which could take place, before the end of the year, there will be a candidate in every constituency?
That is absolutely our intention, yes.
OK, and 3 weeks in, how confident are you that you have the framework and the resource and the strategy to deliver that?
Well, we're a startup, right? So we are building very quickly. I can't pretend that right now we have an infrastructure to fight 650 seats in a general election, but we are far bigger now than we were only 2 weeks ago. Because of the system in the with the European elections and the way it operates on a regional basis, we've been able to stand in these. But of course, the whole point of forming Change UK was to build an alternative in the radical centre ground of British politics. Yeah. And what we know is that people are fed up with the existing choices, and we are trying to provide people with an alternative to that.
I was asking Barry and Alok earlier about the Brexit Party and, to what extent they would even admit on this programme that it might constitute a threat. So I'll ask Barry the same question, given that you share lots of values with Chika, given your past heritage in the party and all the rest of it. Where's the difference now then? I mean, people watching this who are not following politics in detail, they're going to think, hang on a second, these guys are in the same party. Where's the difference? How do you differ in terms of your Brexit stance? Where's the difference?
In terms of Brexit stance, I think the key difference is this. Chaka is somebody who has been ambitious in British politics for a very long time. And the party that has coalesced there are people who are highly ambitious in their party but felt thwarted. And in that sense, it's a group of ambitious malcontents. I don't believe for a moment that there is a central guiding philosophy that is steering this party to some future.
They're all just careerists.
No, what I'm saying is I don't believe that there is a central guiding philosophy. There are people who have been disillusioned with their position in their own party and therefore have decided to form a different one.
But opposing Brexit is a philosophy, is a stance, is a strategy.
Yes, but you heard Chaka just say that, in fact, we're much more than opposing Brexit. Brexit, one way or another, will be over and done with in a matter of, pray God, months. But
you're an optimist.
Probably years. And then a party has to have a vision for the future. And it's not good enough just to say, we want change. It's not good enough just to say, oh, it's a broken system. What you've got to do is you've got to actually be able to lay before the British people a detailed programme, a manifesto that says, here's where at the moment we feel your life needs improving. And these are our remedies. These are our policies. This is how we're going to go about doing it. That's what systematically the Labour Party has done. And that's why at the last general election, people actually found that our manifesto, and Chaka stood on that manifesto, that our manifesto resonated with people.
Okay.
And that's what I will continue to do, and that's what my party, I'm sure, will continue to do.
Same question to you, Alok. Just thinking that you have former colleagues who are with Chaka now as well. If there are enthusiastic Remain Conservatives around thinking, what am I going to do? How am I going to vote? I'm not happy with Theresa May and I don't like the way things are going. Surely that option is there for them. They could go Lib Dem or whatever, but that option is a new option, and it includes people who were formerly Conservatives, some of them very long-standing Conservatives. So do you recognise that there is a potential threat there to you as well as Labour?
Well, look, I mean, firstly, I think, I'm not interested in personal insults and trying to question why people have decided to do a certain thing like Barry's done. I don't want to do that. What I would say, though, is that I think the public looking at this will see Change UK as effectively a protest party on Brexit, but not wanting Brexit at all. And so where I do agree with Barry is that there is a big question mark about what happens with a party like that in terms of, what else do you have to offer the British public other than the fact that you don't want Brexit to be delivered?
Just some more, I'm afraid, bad news for the Conservatives. The Conservatives down 6 in Guildford, but heading possibly towards losing that council as well.
And we're now on, if we look at our tally, over 1,100 losses for the Conservatives, and it's still going up. 102 losses for Labour. 598 gains for the Lib Dems. There'll be over 600 very shortly, which is a remarkable result for them. UKIP having lost 102, and the Independents up significantly. Some key results from you, Rita.
Huw, it's been a night of real turbulence, hasn't it? A night and a day of real turbulence, and there have been some remarkable results. And we've put together a few of the councils just to give you a real flavour of what has happened. The Liberal Democrats have scored some spectacular victories. Chelmsford, possibly chief among them. Let's see if I can go into the results there. Chelmsford is a Liberal Democrat gain from the Conservatives. The Conservatives had a majority of 47. Liberal Democrats have gained that, so they will be absolutely delighted with that. That gain. Same with Bath and North East Somerset. That's a gain from the Conservatives, and that is the sort of area where the Lib Dems traditionally have been strong, fell back after the coalition, but they would point to that sort of result and say that they are coming back. Another Conservative loss here in Folkestone and Hythe, and this time, in fact, the way in which the seat changes worked was that the Conservatives' loss actually went to the Greens and to Labour. So there were wider beneficiaries, if you like, not just the Liberal Democrats, but Labour and the Greens there. Let me show you one or two more results that were very striking. North East Lincolnshire, that was a gain for the Conservatives from no overall control. They'll be happy with that. Ashfield in Nottinghamshire. Now, this was a council that was Labour in 2015. There were mass defections. It went into no overall control. This election, you'll see it's in pink. That means it's an independent council. So the independents score getting about 30 councillors on Ashfield Council. That's a very sort of striking result for them. Let's take a look at one or two of the Labour results tonight. Darlington, very disappointing for them. That was Labour, and in fact, it has only ever been Labour until today, when Labour lost control of the council. In the Wirral, similarly, it was a Labour council, and they've lost control of that. And I just want to go into the results here so that I can show you the share change, which makes it very stark. And you can see Labour lost 13% of the vote compared to last time these seats were up for election. And who are the beneficiaries? Well, the Greens, to a big extent, on 12%, but also the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats. And I'll just show you the final council that we have here, which was good news for Labour. They gained Trafford Council from no overall control. Trafford has for a long time been seen as the Conservatives' big foothold in the northwest. Well, Labour will be very happy to have gained that.
Rita, thank you very much. Gosh, Trafford seems like a very long time ago, doesn't it? Like sort of 10 years ago. But clearly it was a very important milestone for Labour. We've only got a few minutes left of the programme, so, I mean, you'll want to answer some of these points, Shukar, but...
Well, I think this idea that leaving one of the established parties to start up a new party is a careerist move, I think it's rather absurd. Historically, it is certainly not a careerist move to leave one of the established parties, but the people in our group did it because we, in the end, put, our political careers on the line and said, look, we need to do what's best by our communities and our countries. Hang on just a minute. The second point is this issue about, not standing for anything. On the biggest issue, we've set out in detail what our values are and where we've needed to come out with policy positions in respect of moving things that are happening. We've announced policy. But the key issue of the day, of our time, the biggest issue since the Second World War is where are you on Brexit? Do you want a people's vote and do you want to remain in the European Union? We've got a very clear position on that. Whereas I think part of the reason the Labour Party has done badly, and remember John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor, said at 10 p.m. last night on LBC that he thought Labour would be seeing 400 gains or so. And just people can see the figure on the screens. And the problem is that in one part of the country, the Labour Party is trying to face one direction with Barry's message that we must facilitate Brexit, get on with it, I don't want to see a people's vote. And in another part of the country, they're trying to say something different. And there's no clarity whatsoever. So, we've got a clear position. We don't want to see this thing happen. We want to give you the people's vote and we want to remain. It's a clear position. And actually, in fairness to the Brexit Party, it is too.
Okay.
But it isn't insofar as Labour's concerned. So to say we haven't got policy, we don't know where it stands, on the biggest issue of the day, we've got a very clear position and the Labour Party hasn't.
Barry, we've got 30 seconds for you to sum up. I'm really sorry to say that.
No,
but just tell, where are we at the end of this?
Look, I will congratulate the Liberal Democrats on what's been a spectacular night for them. I will congratulate the Green Party on what's been a very good night for them. I think what we have seen is that the Conservative Party has suffered from the incompetence that they've had in managing Brexit or failing to manage Brexit. And I think what's happened is that that vote bank, if you like, has expressed its disaffection with the Conservative Party by going to independents or other parties, anybody, but in Conservative areas you would expect them not necessarily to transfer straight over to Labour. In Labour areas where we've lost ground, I think it's certainly in the North and the Midlands, that's been on the issue of Brexit because people feel that there has been, they wanted Brexit delivered, and we have tried to do that compromise that I spoke of earlier, and they feel that that's not clear enough.
Okay. Alan?
Well, I think very objectively, I think the message to the two main parties is get on, work together, come up with a compromise, get Brexit over the line. And I think that is the message that you're hearing also from voters that you've been interviewing.
Rita, thanks for all your work overnight and today. What was the best bit?
What was the best bit? Working with you, Huw.
That was the right answer, but the wrong answer. But what was the most notable result for you?
I think it has to be Chelmsford. I think that is an extraordinary result to see a 47 majority overturned by the Liberal Democrats like that. It was wow.
Yeah. Rita, thanks very much. And Vicky, your thoughts, just to tie this up at the end here. What are you thinking?
I think what's going to be interesting is MPs returning to Westminster. They will, of course, I'm not saying they need to think about themselves, but they're going to be looking at some of these results and feeling a little bit nervous. And we didn't think at the beginning of the day we'd be talking about the Conservatives only just clinging on by one in Surrey Heath. Equally, for Labour, I think a lot to think about. It's clear that people are not convinced by their message in all of this. Now, the Liberal Democrats, of course, the clear winners of the evening, back in the game, they hope, but of course without the challenge from some of the other parties that they'll have in the Euros. Now, I think if I were in any of those main parties, you're looking ahead to the European elections, which everyone is pretty convinced are going to happen now, you'd have some trepidation about that because there will be other parties taking part in it. And I think the overall thing, is this going to change the dynamic in the Brexit talks that are going on? Will it mean that Labour and the Conservatives finally think, actually, we might have to compromise here?
Vicky, thank you as well for your contribution today. It's good to have you with us. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Barry, for your return visit, double thank you. Thank you very much indeed. And thanks to everyone behind the scenes last night and today for terrific work. It's been a pleasure working with everyone. A quick look at the scoreboard at the end. Why not? Just one last time. The Tories now on over 1,100 losses. Labour losing 99, the Lib Dems up 595. Big gains for the Greens and in the Independents. Thank you very much for watching. From the BBC Election Special, it's goodbye.